The pulse chamber Ethan Reeves had been mapping the Whitmore Cave system for the National Park Service for 7 years, and he knew every documented passage, every surveyed chamber, every cataloged formation within its 17-mile network. The caves beneath the Appalachian karst were his specialty. Limestone dissolution patterns, speleothem growth rates, hydrological flow dynamics. He understood how water carved stone over millennia, creating the cathedral-like spaces that drew recreational cavers and scientists alike. His expertise extended to minute geological signatures, the subtle whispers of deep time etched into the rock. His patrol assignment for November 12th was Section 4 Delta, a relatively stable zone in the system's northeastern quadrant. The route followed a well-established path through the cathedral room, past the frozen waterfall formations, and into the narrower passages that led to the underground river known as Echo Stream. Standard protocol: visual inspection of trail markers, structural assessment of key formations, water quality sampling, and documentation of any changes since the last quarterly survey. His operational brief noted a new seismic activity monitoring schedule, requiring additional sensor deployment points along the Echo Stream axis. Ethan descended the main entrance shaft using the permanent ladder system, his helmet-mounted LED array cutting through absolute darkness. The temperature dropped immediately, from 42 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface to a constant 54 degrees that the caves maintained year-round. The air carried the familiar scent of wet limestone and the subtle organic smell of bat guano from the colonies that roosted in the upper galleries during winter months. He took an atmospheric reading: humidity 98%, oxygen 20.8%, carbon dioxide 410 ppm, all within normal operating parameters for deep cave environments. The metallic tang of newly disturbed mineral deposits was faintly present, an unusual sensory detail. He reached the cathedral room and performed his routine checks at 1437 UTC. The massive flowstone columns showed no new stress fractures. The rimstone pools maintained their typical water levels. Everything appeared exactly as it had during September's inspection. He noted the integrity of the seismic sensors planted during the last survey. All indicators were green. Ethan continued deeper, following a passage that narrowed to a crawl space. Before opening into a corridor, the mapping team had designated the vertebrae, a 50-meter tunnel with regular ceiling, protrusions that resembled a spinal column. His boot prints from the previous patrol were still visible in the clay sediment, undisturbed except for the delicate tracks of cave crickets. The silence here was profound, broken only by the drip of subterranean water and the occasional muted resonance of the geological strata. The anomaly appeared at the corridor's terminus at 1419 UTC. The vertebrae had always ended in a solid limestone wall, a geological dead end, where the cave-forming water flow had encountered a layer of resistant rock and terminated. Ethan had documented this terminus point multiple times. He had photographs, detailed measurements, mineralogical samples from the wall's surface, all logged into the central database under reference 4D term wall 03. The wall was gone. In its place was an opening. Not a collapse or a newly formed crack, but a passage, a deliberate-looking corridor that extended into darkness beyond the reach of his headlamp. The opening was roughly circular, about 1.2 meters in diameter, with smooth edges that showed none of the fractured, chaotic geology typical of recent rockfall. The precision of the aperture was striking, almost machined. Ethan approached slowly, his geologist's training warring with the evidence before his eyes. Caves didn't just spontaneously develop new passages. The process took thousands of years. Carbonic acid dissolving calcium carbonate, grain by grain, creating voids that eventually connected into navigable spaces. The sheer scale and apparent speed of this alteration were unprecedented. He pulled his radio from his belt. Reeves to surface. I'm at the vertebrae terminus and I need to report a significant geological change. Requesting immediate verification of communication link integrity. Static hissed back at him. Ethan adjusted the frequency dial. In service, do you copy? Repeat, surface, do you copy? This is a priority 1 geological event. Nothing but white noise. Radio communication in deep caves was always problematic. The rock absorbed signals and maintaining contact required strategically placed repeater stations. But the vertebrae was within range of repeater station 7. He should have clear communication. Protocol was violated at 03:47 hours, he muttered, recalling a recent maintenance report on the repeater. It had been flagged for an intermittent power issue. Ethan marked the observation in his field notebook. Possible new passage at vertebrae terminus. Coordinates 35°, 82°. Communication failure confirmed. Primary objective, investigation. Secondary objective, establish direct line of sight communication if possible, without compromising safety parameters. He activated his body camera, recording the entrance to the unmapped section. He entered the new corridor at 1523 UTC. The passage maintained its circular profile, the walls unnaturally smooth, not the irregular, scalloped surfaces typical of phreatic tubes formed under water-filled conditions, but genuinely smooth as if polished to a fine sheen. The limestone showed no visible bedding planes, no fossil inclusions, no evidence of the sedimentary processes that created the surrounding cave system. It felt alien to his touch, a cool, slick sensation unlike typical rock. His geological hammer remained unused. There were no fragments to collect, no strata to analyze. The sheer uniformity was unnerving. 30 meters in, at 1528 UTC, Ethan found the petroglyphs. They covered the walls in elaborate spiraling patterns, geometric designs, angular symbols, representations that might have been astronomical or mathematical. The imagery resembled nothing Ethan had seen in his archaeological references, not the simple pictographs left by historic cave explorers, not the rare Native American rock art occasionally found in Appalachian cave entrances. These were different, complex, precise, and they were glowing. The air temperature here registered a subtle increase, a half degree above the baseline, inconsistent with natural cave thermodynamics. A faint bioluminescence emanated from the carved lines, soft blue-green light that pulsed with rhythmic intensity, like a slow heartbeat. The glow was just bright enough to make the symbols visible without his headlamp, creating an eerie illumination that filled the passage with shifting shadows. The light itself seemed to possess a delicate, almost ethereal quality, illuminating the fine texture of the polished limestone without harsh reflections. Ethan had studied cave bioluminescence. He knew about glowworms in New Zealand caves, luminescent fungi in certain environments, even bioluminescent bacteria that colonized specific mineral deposits. But those organisms produced steady light or simple on-off blinks. Nothing created complex, synchronized pulsing patterns across hundreds of individual carvings, especially not in such a geologically anomalous section. This was beyond his current scientific framework. He pulled out his digital camera and began documenting at 1532 UTC. The flash seemed obscenely bright in the dim passage, and when it fired, the petroglyph's bioluminescence intensified momentarily, as if responding to the light stimulus. He noted this reactive property. The luminescent response correlated to external light source, indicating potential photonic interaction or energy transfer. Ethan moved closer to examine a particularly intricate symbol, a spiral pattern with radiating lines that resembled a stylized sun, or perhaps a representation of energy emission. The carving was deep, at least 2 centimeters into the limestone, with edges that showed no tool marks, no evidence of chiseling or scraping. The precision suggested an advanced non-impact method of creation. He reached out and traced the pattern with his gloved finger. The hum started immediately, low frequency. Subsonic, really, more felt than heard. A vibration that traveled up through Ethan's boots, through his skeleton, resonating in his chest cavity and making his teeth ache. The frequency was steady, approximately 19 hertz based on the rhythm he felt in his sternum, right at the edge of human hearing, in the range known to cause feelings of unease and peripheral visual hallucinations. His internal sensor readings indicated a pressure wave propagating through the solid rock, an unusual and powerful phenomenon. The petroglyph's glow intensified. The pulsing synchronized with the hum, creating a visual representation of the acoustic frequency. Blue-green light surged through the carved patterns in waves, flowing along the walls like bioluminescent water following channels. The air shimmered with the displaced photons, creating subtle distortions in his peripheral vision. Ethan pulled his hand back, but the humming continued. The vibration was coming from the rock itself now, from somewhere deep within the limestone. He could feel it through his boots, through the air, through the water vapor that condensed on the cave walls, producing a fine, almost imperceptible mist that settled on his exposed skin, cool and slightly viscous. His vision began to blur, not from the vibration but from something else. The darkness at the edges of his headlamp beam was changing, becoming textured, taking on depth and dimension that shouldn't exist in empty air. Ethan blinked hard, trying to clear his vision, but the effect intensified. He was seeing landscapes. Not hallucinations exactly, but overlays, translucent images superimposed on the cave passage. A forest canopy thick with vegetation he didn't recognize. A sky with wrong-colored clouds, purple and amber, streaming past at impossible speed. Structures, angular and crystalline, rising from terrain that might have been stone or might have been something entirely different. The geological formations in these visions were unlike anything documented on Earth. The images shifted and flowed, never solid, never fully there, but undeniably present. Ethan stumbled backward, his shoulder hitting the cave wall, and the contact with stone intensified the visions. He could see movement now, forms within the translucent landscapes, things that might have been creatures or vehicles or phenomenon entirely outside his frame of reference, their movements defying known physical laws. The hum dropped in frequency. 17 hertz now, maybe 16. The change brought new images, oceans of liquid that caught light wrong, reflecting in colors that didn't exist in Earth's visible spectrum. Structures that seemed to fold into themselves, architecture that violated Euclidean geometry, creating spaces that were simultaneously vast and compressed, hinting at a higher dimensional construction. Ethan's training screamed warnings. Infrasound at these frequencies could cause panic, paranoia, visual disturbances. He was experiencing a textbook case of infrasonic exposure, his brain misinterpreting the vibrations as threatening stimuli, his visual cortex manufacturing explanations for the unease his nervous system felt. His biomonitor wristwatch displayed elevated heart rate and cortisol levels, but that didn't explain the petroglyphs. That didn't explain how primitive carvings were producing precisely tuned acoustic frequencies. That didn't explain the bioluminescence or the passage that shouldn't exist. The sheer specificity of the phenomena contradicted simple infrasound artifacts. The vision sharpened. Ethan saw figures now, bipedal but wrong in their proportions. Their movements too fluid, their silhouettes suggesting anatomies that made his mind rebel at categorizing. They were constructing something, building structures that grew and evolved and changed purpose before his eyes, in landscapes that shifted between familiar terrestrial geology and impossible alien panoramas. These figures possessed an elegance of motion that was both captivating and terrifying. One of the figures turned toward him, not in the vision. In reality, in the passage, standing 10 meters away where nothing had been moments before. The presence was translucent, composed of the same blue-green bioluminescence that pulsed through the petroglyphs. Its form was humanoid enough to be recognizable, but detailed enough to be clearly non-human. Too tall, limbs too long, a torso that seemed to contain more ribs than should be possible. Its head tilted at an angle that suggested curiosity or perhaps confusion, its expression unreadable in the shifting light. The internal structure gave a fleeting impression of complex crystalline biology. Ethan's breath froze in his lungs. His hand found the cave wall behind him, fingers pressing against cold limestone that vibrated with subsonic frequencies. The presence didn't move closer, but it raised one elongated arm and pointed at the wall beside Ethan's head, at a specific petroglyph at 1545 UTC. A symbol Ethan hadn't examined yet, a pattern that looked like concentric circles with a single line breaking through the outermost ring. The hum changed frequency again. Higher now, up into audible range. 25 hertz, 30, climbing steadily into a tone that Ethan could hear as well as feel. The petroglyphs blazed brighter. The translucent presence became more solid, more present, its bioluminescent form gaining texture and depth, the blue-green light intensifying to an almost painful brilliance. And Ethan understood, with a clarity that transcended rational thought, that he was looking at something that existed in the boundary space between what was and what had been, a recording, perhaps, or an echo, or something for which human language had no adequate term. The sheer magnitude of this realization threatened to overwhelm his cognitive processes. The presence pointed again, more insistently, at the specific symbol. The concentric circles with the broken line, Its meaning suddenly became horrifyingly clear in Ethan's mind, arriving as pure conceptual knowledge rather than words. A breach. A barrier. Something that had been sealed and was now open. The passage. The new corridor that shouldn't exist. It wasn't a natural formation. It was the physical manifestation of that broken circle. A seal that had failed. A boundary that had been crossed. A separation between spaces that were supposed to remain divided. The smooth, unnatural walls now made terrifying sense. Ethan's geological training provided the framework his mind desperately needed. Caves were boundaries, interfaces between solid earth and open space, between surface world and subterranean void. Every cave was a breach in the continuous rock, a place where the barrier between above and below had been dissolved. But this was a different kind of breach. Not limestone dissolved by acidic water over millennia, something intentional. Something that the petroglyphs were documenting or warning about, or perhaps attempting to reseal with their precisely tuned frequencies and synchronized bioluminescent pulses. The implications sent a jolt of terror through him. The translucent presence took a step forward. Its form flickered, becoming momentarily more substantial, and Ethan could see details that made his rational mind strain at categorization. Skin that wasn't quite skin. Eyes that held depths that suggested perception across spectrums human vision couldn't process. A posture that conveyed urgency and body language that transcended species. A raw, primal communication beyond words. The hum reached 42 hertz, and the entire passage began to vibrate. Not violently, but with the resonance of a vast tuning fork, every molecule of limestone oscillating in precise harmonic synchronization. The petroglyphs weren't just glowing anymore. They were moving, the carved patterns physically shifting within the stone, reconfiguring themselves like living calligraphy rewriting ancient text. The sensation was overwhelming, a total immersion in an energetic field. Ethan watched as new symbols emerged, flowing into existence along the corridor walls. Mathematical equations appeared, geometric proofs that demonstrated principles his physics education had never covered. Star charts formed, showing constellations that didn't match Earth's sky. Diagrams illustrated structures and mechanisms and relationships that his brain couldn't quite process, but recognized as profoundly important, encoding vast amounts of information directly into his perception. The translucent presence pointed one final time, now indicating the entire wall of shifting petroglyphs. The message was clear. Read, understand, remember. Then the frequency spiked to 60 hertz, and Ethan's vision went white, a deafening white that burned behind his eyelids. He came to, lying on the passage floor, his headlamp askew. Its battery indicator showing 20 minutes had elapsed since his last conscious notation. The hum was gone. The bioluminescence had faded to barely perceptible glimmers. The translucent presence had vanished entirely, leaving only the faint, residual chill of its passage in the air. Ethan pushed himself to his feet at 16:07 UTC, his head pounding with the worst headache of his life, a persistent thrumming deep behind his eyes. The petroglyphs were still there, carved deep into the limestone, but they no longer moved or shifted. They appeared as static as any ancient rock art should be, permanent historical artifacts rather than living warnings, their vibrant energy now dormant. But Ethan knew what he'd seen, what he'd felt, what the subsonic frequencies and bioluminescent figures had tried to communicate through the only means available to them: vibration, light, and the universal language of geometric pattern. The knowledge was etched into his very being, a terrifying certainty. He pulled out his camera with shaking hands and began photographing every symbol, every diagram, every mathematical proof that still remained visible in the fading bioluminescence, meticulously logging their positions and estimated dimensions. Each click of the shutter felt like an affirmation of objective reality against the impossible experiences. His radio crackled suddenly to life at 16:15 UTC, the interference apparently cleared. "Reeves, this is Surface. We lost your signal. What's your status? We're showing a repeater station diagnostic failure in your section. Are you initiating emergency egress?" Ethan raised the radio to his lips, his eyes scanning the corridor that extended deeper into darkness beyond where his headlamp could reach. Somewhere in that passage was the source of the breach, the origin point of the new corridor. the place where whatever barrier these petroglyphs described had been broken. The air within the passage now carried a subtle, almost imperceptible low-frequency resonance, a whisper of the power he had just witnessed. Surface. I've discovered an unmapped passage. Extensive archaeological features. Possible significant scientific discovery. Requesting immediate dispatch of a full archaeological and geological survey team, equipped with advanced atmospheric and energy signature analysis equipment. This event falls outside established survey parameters. I am invoking Procedure 7 Gamma for anomalous discovery. His voice sounded steady even as his hands trembled, a professional mask over profound terror. In his peripheral vision, the deeper darkness at the corridor's end seemed to pulse with faint rhythmic light. Another chamber, perhaps where the breach went deeper, where the boundary between spaces grew even thinner. The faint scent of ozone now mingled with the wet limestone, an electrical signature he couldn't explain. Copy that, Reeves. Do you need backup for survey work, or are you returning to base? Ethan stared into that pulsing darkness. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to seal the vertebrae passage, to pretend the corridor didn't exist, to file a report noting anomalous geological formation and communications failure. But the petroglyphs had shown him glimpses of impossible landscapes, translucent figures that defied biological classification, and mathematical proofs that suggested the universe operated on principles that human science had barely begun to suspect. Whatever had been sealed here had been sealed for a reason, and now the seal was broken. He had witnessed the breaking of a cosmic compact, and the implications were staggering. The darkness pulsed again, and this time Ethan thought he could see shapes moving in those depths. More translucent figures, or perhaps something more substantial, something that was using the breach to cross from whatever space they inhabited into this one. Something was manifesting. Reeves, do you need backup? Confirm your current location and intentions for the record. The question hung in the static-filled air as Ethan's headlamp beam flickered at 1620 UTC, the LED struggling with power it shouldn't be losing. Its beam dimming erratically, and in that moment of dimmed illumination, the bioluminescence surged brighter, illuminating dozens of new figures standing silent in the passage ahead, all of them pointing deeper into the darkness where the breach waited, their ephemeral forms shimmering with an unsettling blue-green urgency. Every fiber of his being registered the presence of these entities, not as apparitions but as tangible, albeit non-corporeal, beings, all of them pointing at whatever was coming through. The silence was broken by a collective low thrum, emanating from the coalescing forms, a prelude to an entry. The deep scan, the hum, was the first thing you noticed, not the roar of the primary diesel generators or the unending howl of the Arctic wind against the insulated prefab walls of Station Boreas, but a low, pervasive thrum that seemed to vibrate directly in your teeth. I'm Dr. Eris Thorne, lead geologist on the Boreas drilling project, designation 734 Alpha. For 6 weeks, we'd been here, a tiny, heated speck of civilization welded to a vast, frozen expanse of nothing, executing a corporate mandate to locate and assess rare earth mineral deposits. The company didn't pay for scenic views. They paid for results, and the daily uplink reports were scrutinized for any deviation from projected progress. Our primary tool was the seismic worm, a state-of-the-art ground-penetrating radar array that utilized a cascade of ultra-low frequency chirps to give us a clear, algorithmically stitched picture of the strata beneath us, theoretically down to 1,000 meters. It was the worm that found the anomaly. At 0416 station time, the main screen in the geolab, which usually displayed the crisp, orderly lines of sediment, cryosol, and ancient rock, was suddenly interrupted. A void, not a cave system which would present with jagged edges and echoes, not a gas pocket, which would give a distinct resonance signature. This was a dark, amorphous shape about 300 meters down that absorbed the radar waves completely, a blind spot in our geological vision. It rendered as pure, dataless black. Jarek, my second in command, a stout, pragmatic man whose beard was permanently rimed with frost even indoors, dubbed it the Shadow, log mark 0419. Density readings are anomalous, he declared, pointing a thick, gloved finger at the screen. The flickering light of the monitor highlighted the concern in his eyes. It's organic. The wave absorption pattern is wrong for any known mineral deposit or geological formation.
It's like a
buried whale. Colossal one, Eris. Nothing in the database matches this signature. Whales don't get buried 300 meters under permafrost that's been solid for 2 million years. Jarek, I'd countered, running the scan again only to get the same result. The data was clean. The equipment was calibrated, but I couldn't shake the fundamental unease. The shape was vaguely ovoid, massive, at least 50 meters across, and utterly out of place. It defied geological logic. Corporate, 1,000 miles away in a climate-controlled boardroom, didn't care for mysteries that delayed their bottom line. Their encrypted reply to my initial report was simple and devoid of curiosity. Drill. Sample. Report. Adhere to project timeline. The day we broke through the final layer of gneiss rock above the anomaly was when the controlled environment of our mission began to unravel. The drill, a marvel of tungsten carbide engineering designed to pulverize rock, whined at a rising, painful pitch and then shuddered to a halt with a jolt that shook the entire station. A faint, acrid smell, the cutting laser scent of stressed ozone from the overloaded motor and something else, something ancient and organic, drifted up from the borehole casing. It was the thick, cloying smell of thawed geosmin, the scent of damp earth after rain, but amplified over 1 million years and laced with a faint, inorganic bitterness. A stream of telemetry on the monitor beside me went red. Catastrophic pressure spike at the drill tip assembly, Jarek announced, his voice tight. Torque exceeded safety parameters by 300%. Main engine stall at 1409 Zulu. Pull it back. Disengage and pull it back now. I yelled into the comms headset, my voice raw. The rig operators, their faces visible on a secondary monitor, fought the controls, their movements frantic. The entire station groaned under the immense strain. The winches screamed, cables went taut as piano wire, but the drill didn't budge. It was stuck fast, held by something 300 meters below. That night, the nightmare started. It wasn't an isolated event. It was a contagion of fear. We all dreamt of pressure, of an unbearable weight of being crushed and compacted in absolute darkness. I'd wake up gasping, my lungs burning, the low hum in our ears inexplicably louder than ever. We'd meet in the mess hall for the 06 Wu shift change, eyes hollow and haunted, nobody wanting to be the first to admit it. Lena, our stoic communications tech, finally broke the silence. She swore she was hearing whispers on the open channels, faint sibilant things that hid beneath the static. She played a recording for me, running it through a series of filters. I heard it too. It wasn't random noise. It sounded like ice cracking under pressure, but with a strange rhythmic cadence, a structured pattern that our software couldn't decipher. 2 days later, with the drill still immovably lodged, the real trouble began. The station's internal sensors started to glitch. The lights in Corridor B would flicker and die for minutes at a time, leaving the passage in unnerving darkness. The heating system in the mess hall went on the fritz, erratically plunging the temperature to below freezing before kicking back on with a hydraulic groan. Jarek dismissed it as the strain on the generators from the continuous failed attempts to retrieve the drill. I wasn't so sure. I had started logging the events and noticed a pattern. The glitches followed a seismic pulse, a tiny, almost undetectable tremor that our sensitive equipment registered every 97 minutes, a pulse originating directly from the shadow. I was in the lab long after my official shift had ended, reviewing the archived data streams from the drill tip's passive sensors, when I saw it. I had isolated the 97-minute pulse and was trying to filter out the background noise of geological feedback. And then there it was, a new signal nested within our own electronic interference. It was faint, biotic in origin, a perfect slow sine wave, a heartbeat. Impossibly slow, but undeniably there. 1 beat every 97 minutes. My own heart hammered against my ribs, a panicked staccato against the slow, measured pulse on the screen. It was awake. Whatever it was, we had not only found it, we had woken it up. I ran to the rig control room, the metal deck plates cold under my boots. Shut it all down. Cut power to the drill. Execute emergency protocol 11B now. Jarek, looking exhausted, stood in my way, his face a mask of obstinacy. Eris, calm down. Corporate will have our heads if we stop now. We have to retrieve that drill. That single assembly is worth $12 million. The drill is the least of our problems. It's alive, Jarek. The anomaly is alive. As I said it, a powerful tremor shook the entire station. This wasn't a micro-seismic pulse. This was a real quake. A violent lurch that threw me against a control console, Metal shrieked, and a hairline crack, impossibly fast, zigzagged across the reinforced polysilicate of the control room window. On the main screen, the image from the worm flickered wildly. The shadow was changing. It was contracting, a visible pulsation on the display in perfect time with the heartbeat I'd found. And the hum. It was no longer a hum. It was a deep, resonant bass note that made the fillings in my teeth ache and the fluid in my inner ear vibrate. Then, with a final, shuddering groan, the power went out. Total darkness. The roar of the generators died, leaving only the sound of the wind and our own ragged, panicked breaths. The emergency lights flickered on a moment later, casting long, dancing shadows in a hellish red. Lena's frightened voice, tinny and laced with static, crackled over the backup battery-powered comms. Main comms are non-responsive as of 2247. Satellite uplink is not being blocked, it's just gone. There's no carrier wave, no handshake, zero signal-to-noise ratio. It's not jammed, the entire Ku-band spectrum is flat. We were cut off, trapped. The temperature in the station began to drop immediately, the cold of the Antarctic seeping in like a physical entity. Yarek, his face pale and slack in the red emergency lighting, finally looked scared. "What have we done, Eris?" Before I could answer, a high-pitched vocalization echoed from outside, a tortured sound of metal twisting under immense pressure. It was the drill rig. We rushed to the window, clearing the condensation with our hands, peering out into the swirling snow. The derrick, a 20-ton steel lattice, was contorting. It bent slowly, impossibly, as if an immense, unseen hand were twisting it into a new, unrecognizable shape. Metal groaned and then snapped with a cannon-like report, the top half of the rig toppling over in a slow-motion crash that was swallowed by the storm, leaving a jagged stump of ruined steel. Silence descended again, heavier and more menacing than before. On my tablet, connected to the last of the wireless sensors, I saw the feed. The heartbeat from below was gone. The seismic activity stopped. All we could hear was the wind, now sounding like a mournful sigh. It destroyed the drill. Jarek whispered, his voice trembling. "It's free," I corrected him, my own voice barely audible. The drill wasn't a tool. It was a plug. We just pulled the cork. The next 12 hours were a blur of deepening cold and escalating fear. We tried to get the generators back online, but the fuel lines were flash-frozen solid. The primary ignition systems were fried. We huddled together in the geolab, the only room we could keep marginally warm with battery-powered heaters salvaged from the emergency lockers. Every creak of the station contracting in the cold, every gust of wind against the windows sent fresh waves of terror through us. Lena sat rocking back and forth in a corner, holding a dead radio to her ear as if waiting for a voice. Yarek stared blankly at the dark monitor where the shadow had been, his face a gray mask of shock. It was Lena who saw it first. She let out a choked gasp, a tiny, hopeless sound pointing a trembling finger towards the far end of the lab. What is that?" At first I saw nothing but shadows. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the dim emergency lighting, I noticed a distortion in the air near the floor vents. A shimmer like heat haze off a blistering road, except it was making the air colder. It was coalescing, drawing motes of dust and ice crystals into a form that wasn't quite solid. It was tall and spindly, a vaguely humanoid shape made of what looked like solidified shadow and freezing mist. It had no discernible features, just a shifting, uncertain outline, its very presence seeming to bend the light around it. We were frozen in place, watching as the presence moved. It didn't walk. It flowed across the floor, silent and smooth as spilled ink. It drifted towards a workbench where we'd left a geological hammer. The object, a heavy steel tool, lifted into the air, held by the intangible form. The presence inspected it, turning it over and over, its ebon form momentarily phasing through a part of the handle before gently setting it back down. It seemed curious, analytically curious. Jarek, snapping out of his stupor, scrambled backwards, knocking over a chair with a loud clatter. "Get away from it," he yelled, his voice cracking with pure terror. The sound seemed to startle the creature. It whipped its head towards him, and though it had no face, I felt a palpable sense of malevolent focus. The hum returned, louder and more dissonant than ever, seeming to emanate directly from the being itself. It started to drift towards Jarek, its form elongating, stretching like taffy. I grabbed a CO2 fire extinguisher from the wall, the only thing I could think of that might pass for a defensive object. Jarek, don't move. Protocol was violated at 1409. You are not thinking clearly, but he was panicking. He snatched a heavy sample case from a table and hurled it at the entity. The case passed right through the shifting form, clattering loudly against the far wall. The thing didn't even seem to notice. It reached Jarek, and one of its long, shadowy limbs touched his chest. He let out a horrifying, strangled vocalization, a sound that was half gurgle, half gasp. His body went rigid, eyes wide with a terror I can't begin to describe. A fine layer of frost instantly coated his clothes, his beard, his eyelashes, sublimating the moisture from his body. The heat was being leached from him, from the very air around him. He crumpled to the floor, a frozen, brittle figure. Lena and I ran. We fled the lab, slamming the heavy insulated door behind us. We could hear the hum vibrating through the steel, could feel the intense, unnatural cold seeping from under the door. We barricaded ourselves in the small, cramped server room, the station's electronic nerve center, now a tomb of silent, useless machinery. It was a foolish, desperate move. There was no escape. The hum grew, and we could hear the entity outside moving through the station. It wasn't hunting us in a predatory way. It was exploring. We heard metal rending, glass shattering, the precise analytical sounds of deconstruction. It was taking our world apart piece by piece as a scientist would dissect a specimen. Hours passed. The cold was unbearable, a physical pain in our bones. Then a new sound, a soft, wet, tearing noise from the HVAC vents above us. A thick, dark residue, black and viscous like crude oil, began to drip into the room. It sizzled where it touched the frozen floor panels, releasing a faint, acrid steam that smelled of ammonia and spoiled meat. It was seeping in from everywhere. Lena began to sob, her body shaking uncontrollably. "It's in the walls," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's everywhere." The presence from the anomaly wasn't just one thing. It was a projection, a tiny part of it. The thing below, the shadow, wasn't just a creature. It was a state of being, an alien consciousness that could manifest itself anywhere within its sphere of influence. We hadn't drilled into a monster. We had drilled into a place that was now overlapping with ours, bleeding through the hole we'd made. I'm recording this on my personal data slate, the battery life indicator blinking a final warning. The hum is a constant, deafening roar now. The dark residue is pooling on the floor. It's rising. Lena has stopped making any sound. I think I'm alone now. The server room door has begun to frost over from the outside, intricate patterns of ice spreading across the steel. I can see a shape forming in the condensation on the other side of the small wire mesh glass porthole. A tall, spindly shape. It wants to see what's inside. It wants to know how we work. I don't think it means to neutralize us, not in the way we understand it. It is simply studying us, and I am its last, most interesting sample. Final log entry. Time 0351. Station Boreas is compromised. The suburbs log start 1432. The job was designated Case 734B, a standard biohazard cleanup, or so the initial brief indicated. The location was a suburban house, 2-story, with a cliché white picket fence that was just a little too perfect. The call had come in coded as an unattended death, but the dispatcher's voice telemetry showed elevated stress markers, a strained edge that our training taught us to recognize. Mark, my partner for the last 5 years, just shrugged it off. Probably a hoarder. Cat 3 contamination at worst, he'd said. His voice a tinny, filtered rasp through the comms of our Level A hazmat suits. He was always the optimist, the one to diffuse tension with a casual remark. But as our sanitized van rolled to a stop at the curb, the silence was the first anomaly. It was a profound, oppressive quiet. No birdsong, no distant hum of traffic, no children playing. Just a heavy, expectant stillness that seemed to press in on the very panels of our vehicle. The air scrubbers we'd placed at the perimeter were already humming, filling the quiet with a low thrum and the faint, acrid smell of ozone. The only familiar scent was the faint, synthetic tang of recycled air in my own helmet. My name is Elias, and for a decade I've been a remediator. I clean what's left behind. Crime scenes, industrial accidents, viral outbreaks. I've waded through things that would turn most people's stomachs inside out and scrubbed away nightmares from walls and floors. It's a job that requires a certain detachment, a clinical mindset that turns horror into a set of procedures. Contaminant A is neutralized with solution B. Particulate matter is filtered and incinerated. Everything has a protocol. Everything can be cleaned. That's what I believed. Before that house, we did our preliminary sweep of the exterior. No signs of forced entry. Windows were intact. The lawn was immaculately manicured. It was the kind of house that usually held nothing more sinister than a PTA bake sale. Exterior scan is clear, Elias. Mark's voice crackled. No thermal anomalies, no structural instability. Let's get this over with. I want to be home in time for the game. I ran my own scanner over the front door, the DR5 unit humming as it analyzed the air quality at the seals. Negative for airborne pathogens, I reported, my own voice sounding flat and distant to my ears. We're going in deck. The lock gave way with a standard issue key we'd been provided. The door swung inward without a sound. The interior was pristine, not just clean, but sterile. It looked like a show home that no one had ever lived in. White carpets, minimalist furniture, not a speck of dust on any surface. There was no smell of decay, which was the second major red flag for an unattended death. There was no smell of anything at all. The air was dead still and cold. This is weird, man, Mark muttered, his heavy boots silent on the plush carpet. Where's the... He didn't need to finish. Where was the mess? Where was the source of the call? We were here to clean, but there was nothing to clean. We moved through the ground floor with practiced efficiency, our movements methodical. Living room, clear. Kitchen, spotless. The countertops gleamed under the beam of my headlamp. Not so much as a fingerprint. It was in the dining room that we found the first sign of something wrong. In the exact center of a large mahogany table, a single dinner plate was set. On the plate was a piece of steak, a baked potato, and a sprig of parsley. It looked perfect, like a photograph from a food magazine, but as I got closer, I saw it was covered in a thick layer of undisturbed dust, a gray blanket that suggested it had been sitting there for years. Mark, get a sample of this particulate matter, I ordered. Something's not right. The rest of the house is sterile, but this has been here a long time. Mark grumbled but complied, carefully scraping a sample into a containment vial. What do you think? Some kind of art installation? He asked, trying to find a rational explanation. I didn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the wall behind the table. It was a faint, almost imperceptible discoloration. A patch of the pristine white wall that was slightly darker, like a shadow that couldn't be cast. I approached it slowly, my handheld biosensor beeping softly. The readings were impossible. It was fluctuating wildly across the electromagnetic spectrum, and the thermal reading was dropping, showing the spot as several degrees colder than the rest of the room. Mark, step back. Protocol was violated at 1512 the moment you entered the designated exclusionary zone, I said, my voice sharp, a formal reprimand. Acknowledge. Before I could stop him, Mark reached out and touched it. It's just a stain, El, he said, his gloved fingers pressing against the wall. His hand went through it. Not into the drywall, but through the surface, as if the wall had turned to smoke. He snatched his hand back with a yelp, stumbling away. What the hell? He stammered, his breath fogging the inside of his faceplate. The spot on the wall rippled, the discoloration darkening, coalescing. It looked wet now, like a smear of crude oil spreading outwards. From the center of the patch, a thick, dark residue began to ooze, defying gravity as it crept up the wall. It wasn't just a liquid. It had a texture, a chaotic shifting pattern within it that seemed to writhe. Back away now, I commanded, pulling my own standard-issue containment object, a high-density foam sprayer. We were trained for spills, for bioagents, but not for this. The patch on the wall continued to expand, the dark residue pooling and dripping upwards. The silence of the house was broken by a new sound, a low, wet, guttural clicking that seemed to come from inside the wall itself. It was a sound my brain couldn't process, both organic and mechanical, a chilling rhythm that vibrated through the soles of my boots. We retreated to the hallway, our training kicking in despite the sheer impossibility of the situation. Containment breacher, I reported into my comm, my voice tight. Unknown substance, non-biological, displaying anomalous physical properties, recommending level 4 lockdown of the site. The reply was static. Mark was breathing heavily, his eyes wide behind his visor. Elias, what was that? What did I touch? He asked, his voice trembling. I don't know, I admitted, my own professional detachment shattering. We needed to get out, reassess, call in a science team. But as I turned towards the front door, it slammed shut with a deafening boom that shook the entire house. The deadbolt slid across with a sound of grinding metal. We were trapped. The clicking from the dining room grew louder, joined by a slurping, tearing sound. It was the sound of something eating. The temperature in the house plummeted. I could see my breath condensing, a rare occurrence inside the climate-controlled suit. "The power's still on," Mark whispered, pointing to a still-glowing light fixture. "What's happening?" The house wasn't losing power. It was being drained of heat, of energy. The darkness on the dining room wall was now a churning vortex, a ragged hole in reality. And from it, something was beginning to emerge. It was a shape, a silhouette of a man, but it was wrong in every conceivable way. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent at impossible angles. It was made of the same writhing, dark residue as the patch on the wall. A being of pure shadow and shifting chaos. It had no discernible features, no face, yet I felt its attention fix on us. It took a jerky, unnatural step out of the wall and onto the pristine white carpet, leaving no stain, no trace of its passage. It simply what was. "Mark, get upstairs. Find another way out. A window, anything," I ordered, raising the foam sprayer. It felt like a child's toy against whatever this was. "Go!" Mark hesitated for a second, then scrambled up the stairs, his movements clumsy in his terror. I stood my ground, my heart hammering against my ribs. The presence moved towards me, its form shifting, sometimes bipedal, sometimes a crawling mass of shadowy tendrils. The clicking sound was coming from it now, a constant, chittering threat. I fired the sprayer. A blast of rapidly expanding containment foam shot out, hitting the creature square in the chest. For a moment it was engulfed. The foam was designed to harden in seconds, immobilizing anything it touched, but the presence simply absorbed it. The white foam turned black and dissolved into its form, feeding it, making it larger. It let out a sound then, not a vocalization, but a wave of pure psychic pressure that slammed into me, making my teeth ache and my vision swim. It was a sound of immense ancient hunger. I stumbled back, my head ringing, my professional training screaming at me that this was a situation I was not equipped for. We weren't cleaners. We were food. A terrified vocalization echoed from upstairs. "Elias, it's up here too!" Mark's voice was strained with panic. "The walls. Oh God, the walls." I turned and ran for the stairs, the thing in the hall gliding silently behind me. I took the stairs two at a time, my heavy suit feeling like lead. The upstairs hallway was worse. The walls were weeping with the dark residue, the entire corridor seeming to breathe. The pristine wallpaper was peeling away to reveal that same churning, impossible darkness beneath. It was like we were inside the digestive tract of some colossal, unknowable being. I saw Mark at the end of the hall, frantically trying to break a window with a heavy lamp he'd grabbed from a bedroom. The glass wouldn't break. It wouldn't even crack. He slammed the heavy object against it again and again, the impacts making no sound. "It's no use," he yelled, turning to me, his face a mask of sheer terror. "The house. It's not real." Behind him, a section of the wall bulged outwards, a face pressing through the floral-patterned wallpaper. It was a human face, but stretched and distorted, its mouth a silent, gaping O of agony, its eyes wide and empty. Then another face pushed through beside it, and another, a gallery of silent, suffering souls trapped within the structure. Then from the bedroom to my left, I heard a child's laughter. It was a light, joyful sound that was so utterly out of place it was more terrifying than any vocalization. I saw Mark's head snap towards the sound, his resolve breaking. "No," he whispered. The door to the bedroom creaked open. Inside it was a child's room, decorated with stars and planets on the ceiling. In the center of the room, a little boy was sitting on the floor playing with blocks. He looked up and he smiled. It was a normal, happy smile. "Daddy?" he said, his voice clear as a bell. Mark let out a choked sob. "Benny," he whispered. His son Benny had died in a car accident 2 years prior. It was a wound Mark never let heal. "That's not him, Mark," I vocalized, my voice cracking. "It's a trick. It's the house." But he wasn't listening. He took a stumbling step towards the room, his hand outstretched. "Benny, is it really you?" Now the presence I'd left downstairs was now at the top of the stairs, a formless pillar of darkness. It wasn't rushing. It was watching, savoring. The house was playing with its food. "Daddy, come play with me," the little boy said, his smile widening, becoming too large for his face. Mark, tears streaming down his face inside his helmet, took another step. Mark, no." I lunged for him, but I was too late. He crossed the threshold into the bedroom. The moment his foot touched the carpet inside, the playful illusion vanished. The child's form dissolved into a swarm of the same dark, writhing tendrils. They swarmed over Mark, pulling him down. He let out one single choked vocalization, a sound of horrified realization before he was completely engulfed. The door to the bedroom slammed shut, and the last thing I saw was Mark's gloved hand pressing against the door's small window before it too was pulled back into the darkness. There was a wet crunching sound and then silence. My mind broke. All protocol, all training evaporated into pure primal fear. I was no longer a remediator. I was just prey. The gallery of faces in the wall all turned to look at me, their silent mouths stretching into wider and wider vocalizations of despair. The presence glided down the hall, its form solidifying, taking on the shape of Mark, my partner, still clad in his hazmat suit. The faceplate of the helmet was pitch black, a void. It raised a hand and beckoned to me. I ran. I have no memory of choosing a direction. I just ran. I burst through a door at the end of the hall into what must have been the master bedroom. Like the rest of the house, it was immaculate. A large four-poster bed, a vanity, a walk-in closet. The window. It had to be the window. I scrambled towards it, fumbling with the emergency release on my suit that would detach the heaviest parts of the life support system. As I reached the window, I saw my reflection, but it wasn't me. It was an older, skeletal version of myself, my skin gray and stretched tight over my skull, my eyes hollow sockets of blackness. A hand landed on my shoulder. I didn't need to turn to know it was the presence wearing Mark's form. The psychic pressure returned 10 times stronger, a nail being driven into my skull. It wasn't trying to neutralize me. It was trying to show me something. My mind was flooded with images, with sensations. I felt the eons the house had waited, hungry. I saw the family that had lived here, a happy couple and their 2 children, slowly driven mad by the whispers in the walls, until one day they simply stopped. They sat down for dinner and never got up, their bodies slowly turning to dust on their plates. I saw other victims, a mailman, a pair of teenagers on a dare, all of them drawn in, consumed, their last moments of terror becoming part of the house's very structure, a seasoning for its endless appetite. The house didn't have a presence in it. The house was the presence. The grip on my shoulder tightened and the cold was absolute, a void from which no heat could ever escape. I looked at the window again, not at my horrifying reflection, but through it. I saw the street, our van, the manicured lawns. I saw the world I was about to be permanently separated from. With the last ounce of my will, I ignored the thing behind me and focused on that window. It wasn't made of glass. It was made of something else, something the house had created. But it was a lie. All of it was a lie. The house, the furniture, the unbreakable windows. It was all a projection, a lure. The real world was just on the other side. It's not real, I whispered, the words a prayer. I closed my eyes and threw my entire body forward. There was no shattering glass. There was only an instantaneous wrenching, tearing sensation, like being turned inside out and backwards at the same time. I felt an eternity of cold, silent rage as I was ripped from its grasp. And pain. I hit something hard and tumbled onto wet grass. I gasped, sucking in real air, smelling the damp earth and my own sweat. I had landed on the front lawn, 20 feet from the house. I was out. My suit was shredded in a dozen places, and a deep gash ran along my arm where something had caught me. A thin line of dark residue already welling up. I scrambled away. Crab-walking backwards, my eyes locked on the house. It looked exactly as it had when we arrived. A normal, quiet, suburban home. The front door was closed. The lights were off. It was just a house. But I knew what it was. I knew what was inside, waiting patiently for the next meal to wander in. I left everything, the van, the equipment, Mark, what was left of him. I just ran. I didn't stop running until the white picket fence had disappeared from view. The official report lists the incident as an equipment malfunction leading to a psychotic break. It says I suffered a containment breach of an unknown hallucinogen. It says Mark's equipment failed and his body was never recovered from the structurally unsound building, which was later demolished. There's no mention of a house that eats people. No report on a presence that wears the faces of the dead. They can't explain the readings from my suit's data recorder, or the strange, non-organic material found in my wounds, a dark residue that medical science has no name for. They can't, so they ignore it. But I can't. Every night I close my eyes and I'm back in that hallway. I see the faces in the walls and I hear a child's laughter from an empty room. I don't clean anymore. I can't, because I know that some stains don't come out. Some horrors can't be scrubbed away. They just wait, and they are hungry. Log end, error, data corruption detected. The Benzit wasn't a search and rescue op, not in the traditional sense. It was a recovery, a biohazard cleanup technically. The sub, a Typhoon-class ballistic missile boat named the K-2 Muntin Kursk, which was a bit on the nose, had gone silent 3 weeks prior during deep-sea trials in the Barents Sea. The official story was a catastrophic malfunction. The unofficial story, the one that got us the contract, was a lot weirder and a lot more expensive. Our team, callsign Janus, specialized in this sort of thing. Hazmat ops in unconventional environments. We'd cleaned up everything from illegal nerve agent labs in abandoned Siberian gulags to failed genetic experiments in corporate black sites. A dead sub was comparatively a walk in the park. My team consisted of Miller, our tech and comms expert, Anya, our medic and biologist, and me, the team lead. We made our approach via a converted icebreaker, the Polariso. The Barents Sea was a churning slate-gray monster, even in the relative calm of summer. We located the Kursk resting on a seabed shelf, 1,000 feet down. It was unnervingly pristine. No visible hull damage, no debris field. Just a silent, black leviathan on the ocean floor. We descended in a Triton submersible, its floodlights cutting futile cones into the oppressive dark. Docking with the forward escape hatch was tense. Every groan of metal under the immense pressure was a reminder of how little room for error we had. Docking clamp secured. Airlock pressure equalizing. Miller's voice, calm and measured, crackled over the comms. Opening outer hatch. "Enjoy the ambiance, boss." The inner hatch hissed open, and the first thing that hit us was the smell. It wasn't the expected stench of decay. It was clean, sterile. The air tasted of tin and salt, thick with the cloying smell of ozone from shorting electronics and the damp decay of mildewed insulation. The lights in our exosuits cut through the gloom, revealing a corridor that was immaculate. My gloved hand brushed against a bulkhead. Inside my exosuit's gauntlet, the haptic sensors registered a fine, gritty texture over the slick paint, like a crystalline dust. Salt creep, impossible at this depth and with intact seals. It was too immaculate. "Anya, run a preliminary atmospheric," I ordered, my boots clanging softly on the grated floor. The emergency lights were on, casting long, distorted shadows. There was a low, almost subaural hum resonating through the deck plates. Air is clean. Scrubbers must still be active. Oxygen is at 19%. CO2 levels are slightly elevated but acceptable. "No airborne pathogens detected," she reported, her voice tight with the same confusion I felt. "This doesn't make sense. A crew of over 100. Where's the bioload?" We moved in a standard 3-person diamond formation, our rifles with integrated sensors sweeping every angle. The crew quarters were first. Each bunk was perfectly made. Lockers were closed. A chessboard sat mid-game on a small table, pieces perfectly arranged. It looked like the crew had simply vanished. "Find the log room," I said. "Let's see what the captain has to say." The command center was the same story. Polished chrome and dark screens. Not a single smudge or sign of struggle. Miller jacked his data slate into the main console. He was the best, a true digital necromancer. If there was a story to be told, he would find it. He worked in silence for a few minutes, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. Then a sharp intake of breath. "Boss, you need to see this." I moved to his side, Anya close behind. On the screen, the ship's log was spooled out. The final entries were wrong. Log entry 47B 1403. The sea is singing. We are listening. Log entry 48A 1621. The pressure is a gift. It reshapes us. We must be worthy. Log entry 49C 1940. We have shed our unnecessary skins. The metal is too small now. We are going outside to stretch. "What the hell is this?" Anya whispered, her hand moving unconsciously towards the medical kit on her hip. "It's nonsense," Miller stated flatly. "The timestamps are jumbled. Some of these are dated for tomorrow. The last entry is just a string of binary. It's not code. It's a fractal. A repeating pattern that goes on for infinity." The low hum in the ship seemed to intensify, a deep resonant thrum that vibrated in my teeth. We need to find the reactor room, I said, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. If there was a containment breach, it would explain the crew's psychological break. Protocol breach. Biosignature readings are anomalous and exceed mission parameters. Abort criteria met as of 2117, Anya said, her voice a sharp clinical blade cutting through the weirdness. I am formally recommending immediate evacuation. It was a recommendation, but it sounded like an order. Not yet, I countered. We have a job to do. Find the crew, determine the cause. That's the contract. We move to engineering. Standard protocols. If we see one hostile, we pull out. Agreed? They both nodded, the tension palpable. Our boots echoed in the silent corridors as we moved deeper into the sub. The humming grew louder, a bass note that seemed to originate from the very hull of the submarine. We passed the mess hall. Trays of synthetic nutrient paste were left on tables untouched. A coffee mug sat on a counter. A thin film of dark residue settled at the bottom. Engineering was sealed behind a heavy pressure-resistant door. A red warning light pulsed weakly above it. Radiation? I asked Anya. Her Geiger counter remained silent. No radiation, no chemical agents, no biotoxins. I'm reading nothing, which is reading as a big something to me. Miller bypassed the electronic lock. The door slid open with a pneumatic sigh, revealing the cavernous engine room. The twin reactors housed in their lead-lined shells were dark and cold. But the room wasn't empty, they were here. The crew. They were fused into the infrastructure of the room. A mass of tangled limbs and torsos melded with pipes, conduits, and bulkheads. It wasn't a collage of bodies. It was a single, cohesive sculpture of flesh and steel. Their skin was pale and waxy, stretched taut over bones that seemed to have been bent and reformed. There was no dark residue, no sign of violence. It was as if they had willingly pressed themselves into the machinery until they became part of it. Their faces were all turned towards us, eyes wide open, empty. Their mouths were slightly agape, as if in the middle of a silent, collective vocalization. Anya gagged behind me. Miller just stood, frozen, his data slate slipping from his numb fingers and clattering to the floor. The humming was deafening now, coming from the mass itself. It was the source, biosigns. They're active, Anya choked out, pointing a trembling finger. She was right. In the center of the grotesque amalgamation, a chest cavity, stretched and distorted, was slowly, rhythmically pulsing. A single, massive heart, woven from a dozen smaller ones, was beating. From the tangled mass of bodies, one of the figures began to move. It detached itself from the wall with a sound of tearing cartilage and wet suction. It wasn't a person anymore. It was tall, impossibly so, its limbs elongated and jointed in ways that were fundamentally wrong. Its head was tilted at a permanent 90-degree angle, its jaw unhinged. It took a step, its bare feet slapping against the metal deck. It wasn't walking, it was flowing. "Contact," I yelled, my voice sounding thin and reedy. "Fall back to the command center, now!" I raised my rifle, the targeting laser painting a red dot on the thing's chest. I fired. The high-velocity flechettes, designed to punch through body armor, impacted with a series of dull thuds. They didn't penetrate. They were absorbed into the creature's flesh, which rippled like thick gelatin. It didn't even slow down. Another figure was pulling itself free from a cluster of pipes, its spine bent into a perfect arch. We ran. The sterile corridors were no longer a comfort. They were a trap. The humming was everywhere inside my head, a physical pressure that made my vision swim. We slammed the engine room door shut, Miller fumbling to engage the emergency lock. "It won't hold," he shouted over the sound of something heavy and wet slamming against the other side. The metal of the door bulged inward, the red warning light flickering and dying. "Through here," Anya yelled, pointing to a maintenance ladder. "It leads to the torpedo room. We can vent it to the sea, flush them out." It was a desperate, insane plan, but it was the only one we had. I went first, Anya right behind me. Miller paused, turning back to the groaning door. "Miller, let's go," I vocalized down at him. "The data," he yelled back, snatching his slate from the floor. "The fractal, it's a signal. They're not just messed up. They're a goddamn broadcast antenna." The door ripped from its hinges with a screech of tortured metal. The first creature, the tall one, filled the doorway. It unfolded itself, its limbs scraping against the frame. Miller didn't hesitate. He raised his sidearm, a heavy caliber kinetic pulse pistol, and fired. Not at the creature, but at the main power conduit next to it. The explosion was blinding. A shower of sparks and a wave of superheated air blasted down the corridor. I saw Miller thrown back like a rag doll, his body slamming into the far bulkhead before the emergency blast doors slammed shut, sealing off the section. The last thing I saw was his outstretched hand, the data slate still clutched in it. The lights went out. All of them. We were plunged into absolute, suffocating blackness, broken only by the thin beams of the flashlights on our rifles. The humming was gone, replaced by an even more terrifying silence. "Miller." Anya's voice was a broken whisper. "He's gone," I said, the words tasting like ash. "He bought us a few seconds. We have to use them." We scrambled up the ladder, our breaths ragged. The torpedo room was at the bow of the sub. It was our only way out that didn't involve going back the way we came. The room was a cramped space dominated by the massive outer torpedo tubes. "The outer doors," I gasped, my lungs burning. "Can you open them?" Anya was already at a control panel, her light darting across the faded schematics. "The main power is out. It'll have to be manual. The cranks." She pointed to a series of large, rust-covered wheels. "It would take both of us." As we ran to the first one, a low scraping sound echoed from the corridor we'd just left. They were coming. We grabbed the first wheel and heaved. The metal groaned in protest, stiff from disuse and pressure. My muscles screamed. Slowly, agonizingly, the pressure gauge for Tube 1 began to drop as the outer door cracked open. A torrent of freezing seawater began to flood the compartment. A scratching sound. Close. Not from the corridor, but from inside the room. My light snapped to one of the torpedo tubes. The launch door was ajar. A single pale hand was wrapped around the edge, its fingers impossibly long. Anya saw it too and let out a choked vocalization. From within the tube, a figure began to emerge. It was one of the crew, a woman in a tattered officer's uniform. Her body was contorted, her limbs bent backwards. She crawled out onto the floor, her head rotating a full 180 degrees to look at us. Her eyes were milky white, and her jaw was split down the middle, opening into a silent, gaping maw. There was a loud bang from the corridor, then another. They were trying to break through the blast doors. "Keep turning," I yelled, leaving Anya at the wheel and moving towards the new threat. I fired a 3-round burst into its center mass. The impact barely staggered it. It rose to its feet, its broken limbs clicking into place. It was another one of them. Another part of the whole. I saw the object then. A heavy-duty wrench bolted to the wall as part of an emergency toolkit. I tore it free and swung it with all my might at the creature's head. There was a sickening, wet crunch and it collapsed. Not dead. There was no way to neutralize it, just incapacitated, but more were coming. I could hear them in the walls now, scuttling through the maintenance ducts and crawl spaces, their strange, elongated bodies allowing them to navigate the sub's innards like rats in a maze. "It's open," Anya shrieked. "Tube 1 is open." The water was up to our waists, icy and black. The pressure difference was immense, creating a powerful current that was pulling everything in the room towards the open tube. I grabbed Anya's arm and we fought our way towards it. The blast door behind us finally gave way and the corridor was filled with them. The tall one, the arched one, dozens more, a tide of pale, flowing flesh all moving towards us. We reached the tube. I shoved Anya in first. "Go!" The current took her, pulling her into the blackness of the open sea. I turned to follow, but something grabbed my leg. It was the one I'd hit with the wrench. Its grip was like a vice. It was pulling me back, its split jaw opening and closing, a silent, hungry clicking. They were almost on me. I could see their empty eyes, feel the psychic pressure of their collective consciousness, a silent, terrible song of pressure and flesh. I aimed my rifle down, fired a single shot into the joint of the creature's arm. There was a snap of bone, and the grip loosened just enough. I kicked free and threw myself into the tube. The force of the water was like a physical blow, expelling me from the submarine like a defective torpedo. I tumbled through the crushing dark, my lungs screaming for air I didn't have. The pressure was immense. The Benz, the name of the boat, wasn't a coincidence. It was a promise. My exosuit's emergency buoyancy system fired automatically, a sudden, violent ascent. I rocketed towards the surface, the oral pressure song of the things below fading. I broke the surface, gasping, coughing up seawater. The gray sky of the Barents Sea, the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The Polaris's searchlights found me almost immediately. They pulled me and Anya from the water. We were the only survivors. Miller was gone. The data was gone. The official report cited a reactor leak and mass psychosis, a tragic but explainable accident. The Janus program was quietly disbanded. Our records and the Kursk's true fate were buried under a mountain of government redactions. But I know what happened. I carry it with me. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I can still feel it. That deep resonant hum, that pressure. I can hear the sea singing. And I know, deep in the crushing dark, the crew of the K-219 are still broadcasting their terrible silent song. They're waiting. They're stretching. And they're growing. There are things in the deep that are older than the sea itself. Things that hunger for more than just flesh. They hunger for form. And we in our fragile metal shells look so very much like a skeleton, just waiting for new skin. I often wonder what became of the presence that haunted the vessel. If it was contained by the depths, or if, by opening that door, we let it out into the world. Pressure. Log start, 0912, UTC, habitat atmosphere, stable, pressure, 20.2 bar. The job was simple, on paper. A routine structural integrity check and TIG weld on riser clamp C14, 200 meters below the surface. Leo was a saturation diver, a highly specialized, highly paid technician who lived for weeks at a time in the cramped, helium-rich environment of a pressurized habitat, the SAT, aboard the oil rig Triton. The air he breathed had the faint, sterile odor of the CO2 scrubbers, mixed with the metallic tang of recycled oxygen, a constant reminder of the fragile man-made bubble he called home. The deep ocean was his office, a place of crushing silence and profound absolute darkness, but he was acclimated to it. The money was a siren's call he couldn't resist, the only thing loud enough to drown out the inherent risks. Alpha 1 to surface, beginning descent sequence for C-14. All pre-dive systems check out green. Bell pressure equalized, heard Leo's voice, distorted into a high-pitched chipmunk tone by the helium atmosphere, crackled over the comms system. Copy that. Alpha 1, or the topside supervisor. A disembodied voice named Henderson replied clinically. Your dive clock has started. Alpha 2 Marcus is on standby at the bell. Topside weather is clear. Sea state is minimal. Let's make this a clean, efficient dive. Execute, Dottie. The diving bell, a cramped steel sphere smelling of ozone and damp metal, began its slow descent, lowering Leo into the abyss. The world outside the small viewport dissolved into a gradient of blue, then a muted gray, then an impenetrable liquid black. His powerful headlamps cut a lonely conical path through the water, illuminating a perpetual blizzard of marine snow, the constant silent rain of organic detritus from the sunlit world miles above. It was like falling through a dead galaxy of dust and ghosts. Log update, 0948 UTC, depth 200 meters, external temp 4 degrees. He reached the target clamp. A massive ring of steel bolted to the rig's colossal concrete leg. Generations of barnacles and ghostly white sea anemones clung to every available surface, a living, calcified skin over the man-made structure. The view was nominal. He began his work, scraping away the dense marine life with a hydraulic brush, the grating sound vibrating through the water, his suit, and into his bones. He was preparing to initiate the pre-weld heating pass when he saw it. It was a patch of something anomalous. It wasn't rust, not a known species of coral or sponge cataloged in the company's extensive biohazard database. It was a pulsating web-like growth, pitch black and veined with a faint, sick-looking bioluminescent purple. It clung to the metal just below the clamp assembly, appearing to throb with a slow, hideously rhythmic pulse, like a diseased heart. Surface. This is Alpha 1. I'm observing an anomalous biological growth on the riser, coordinates appended. It appears organic, structure is reticulated, but it's unlike anything in my identification guide. Requesting a biologist to review my camera feed for analysis, there was a pause filled with the low hiss of the comms. Alpha 1, we're not seeing anything unusual on your primary feed but some deep water algae, Henderson said, his voice tinged with the unmistakable sound of managerial annoyance. A video signal is degraded due to thermocline interference at this depth. Just clean it off and get on with the weld. The clock is ticking and we're on a tight schedule. Leo hesitated, his gloved hand hovering. The thing felt fundamentally wrong. The silent pulse seemed to match his own elevated heart rate. He reached out with his scraper, gently prodding the edge of it. The moment the tool steel made contact, the black mass recoiled violently, Like stimulated muscle tissue, a dense cloud of inky spores erupted, blanketing his forward sensors and triggering a proximity alarm. Whoa. Surface, the growth is highly reactive, confirming biological entity. It just released some kind of particulate matter. My forward sensors are obscured. Man, Leo, get a grip. Henderson's voice was sharp. It's a disturbed sponge colony, nothing more. The particulate is just silt. Your sensors are likely experiencing electrostatic interference. Ignore the false reading, clear the surface, and do your job. Now. Reluctantly, Leo maneuvered his welding torch into position. He couldn't shake the persistent primal feeling of being watched. He struck the arc, and a brilliant, searing blue-white light flared to life, momentarily vaporizing the darkness. The superheated metal groaned under the thermal stress, and the immediate area filled with the familiar, almost comforting scent of ozone and ionized salt. It was a process he'd done 1,000 times, but as he focused on the molten bead of the weld, his light caught distinct movement in the far periphery of his vision. A shadow, large and impossibly fast, darted away from the edge of his visibility. Did you see that surface? On my left? And see what, Leo? There's nothing on local sonar but a school of cod well outside your operational area. Stop getting spooked by marine snow and focus on the task at hand. Leo completed the weld, the bead clean and perfect, but his eyes were constantly scanning the oppressive darkness around him. The unease was a cold, heavy knot in his stomach. He secured his tools and ascended back to the relative sanctuary of the diving bell, where Marcus was waiting, his helmet light a welcoming beacon. You look like you've seen a presence, Marcus said, his own helium-laced voice tinny through the suit-to-suit comm. Yet Henderson's been riding you hard on the channel. Now, I saw something down there, Mark. Something growing on the leg, and something else moving in the water. And it's just the deeps playing tricks on you, buddy, Marcus said, patting him on the shoulder of his bulky hard suit. Nitrogen narcosis, even a little, can mess with you. My turn. C-15 awaits, Doc. Marcus cycled out of the bell, his powerful light a fading star as he descended. Leo watched the camera feed from the control panel inside the bell. Marcus reached clamp C-15, another 50 meters deeper, where the pressure was exponentially greater. All right, Henderson, I'm at C-15R, Marcus reported, his voice cheerful. It looks clean down here. No weird sea goo to report. Leo must be breathing too much of the premium-grade helium. Suddenly, Marcus's camera feed jittered violently. What the hell was that? He yelled, his tone instantly shifting from jovial to alarmed. The beam from his light swung wildly, illuminating nothing but roiling silt and his own expelled bubbles. Something just hit me. Something big. Hard impact on my back. Dyson Alpha 2, report your status. What is your situation? Henderson demanded, his voice suddenly sharp and stripped of its earlier annoyance. It's here. It's... Marcus's voice was severed, replaced by a horrific, wet, tearing sound that echoed through the comm system, a noise that spoke of metal and flesh yielding to immense force. It was followed by a garbled, high-pitched vocalization of pure agony that was abruptly, chillingly silenced. The camera feed went to black static. Marcus, Leo shouted, hammering his fist on the console. Marcus, respond. Only static answered. Leo, what is happening? Henderson's voice was strained, tight. Alpha 2 comms and biotelemetry terminated at 14:38:12 UTC. Asset Recovery Protocol 7 Gamma is now in effect. You are the designated primary responder, Alpha 1. You need to go down there, he's gone. You heard that noise. Something neutralized him, and we don't have confirmation of that, Henderson said, his voice regaining a cold procedural calm that was somehow more terrifying than panic. It could be a catastrophic equipment malfunction. A suit rupture. You are the closest asset. Your orders are to proceed to Alpha 2's last known coordinates and assess the situation. Now go to Fear, Cold, and Absolute ward with ingrained duty. Marcus was his friend. He had to go. Cursing Henderson, the company, and the entire ocean, Leo pushed himself out of the bell's hatch, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He descended past his own fresh weld spot. The dark patch of growth was visibly larger now, its purple veins pulsing more brightly. He reached the depth where Marcus had vanished. The water was colder here, the pressure a tangible, squeezing weight on his suit. His light beam sliced through the darkness, landing on the rig leg. Clamp C-15 was mangled, The thick steel bent and twisted as if by a colossal hydraulic press. Marcus's welding object was fused to the metal, its power pack cracked open and leaking electrolytes. And then he saw the dark residue in the water, a faint swirling cloud of red-black that his mind refused to process for what it was. A high-frequency sonar ping echoed from his suit's system. An object, massive and dense, was directly below him, moving. Slowly he angled his lights down. It was attached to the rig leg, camouflaged as part of the structure itself. What he had seen before, the small patch of growth, was just a tiny offshoot, a lure. This was the main body, a creature of impossible scale, a grotesque fusion of chitinous plates, dozens of writhing tendrils, and a hide that was the color of coagulated night. It was covered in the same pulsating web-like tissue, which now glowed with a predatory, intense purple light. Dozens of eyes, like polished obsidian beads, swiveled and opened simultaneously, all focusing directly on him. In the center of the pulsating mass was Marcus's figure. His hard suit was torn open like a tin can, and his body was being absorbed, integrated into the creature's flesh. His suit was breached and peeled back, the fabric and wiring being drawn into the creature's pulsating tissue, a grotesque synthesis of man and monster. His helmet was cracked, and his face, visible through the shattered visor, was a mask of frozen, silent terror. Leo's breath hitched, trapped in his lungs. He couldn't make a sound, couldn't manage a vocalization. He was paralyzed, a fly caught in a cosmic spider's web 250 meters beneath the waves. One of the creature's tendrils, impossibly long and tipped with a bony serrated barb, detached from the rig and snaked towards him with horrifying, fluid speed. The movement broke his paralysis. He fired his suit's thrusters, rocketing upwards, away from the abomination. The tendril gave chase, silent and relentless. He could hear a low, guttural thrumming sound, a vibration that resonated through the water and into the very marrow of his bones. Henderson, it's a creature, a massive creature. It's got Marcus. It's coming after me, he yelled hysterically, his professional calm shattered. Leo, calm down. Your vitals are spiking into the red. Your breathing mix is unsustainable. There is nothing there. Your telemetry is clear. You need to get back to the bell immediately. The tendril lashed out, scraping against his leg with the sound of metal on metal. Alarms blared inside his helmet. Warning, pressure differential exceeding tolerance, joint seal at left ankle compromised. He was losing pressure. The precious helium in his breathing mix was being replaced by the crushing, lethal weight of the sea. His vision began to tunnel, the edges turning gray. He risked a look back. The creature was detaching from the rig, unfolding its true, horrific form. It was not just a growth. It was a hunter, an apex predator in a realm man had only just begun to touch, and this was its territory. With the last of his strength and dwindling oxygen, he pushed the thrusters to their maximum, a desperate, uncontrolled ascent. The tendril struck again, wrapping around his ankle. He felt a sharp, piercing pain as the barb punctured the suit's composite shell. He kicked wildly, his heavy mag boot connecting with something unexpectedly hard. The tendril loosened for a fraction of a second, just enough for him to pull free. He tumbled into the diving bell, slamming the inner hatch shut just as the tendril smashed against the reinforced acrylic viewport, a spiderweb of cracks instantly appearing. He saw a single, malevolent obsidian eye staring at him from the darkness before the bell began its rapid emergency ascent. He doesn't remember much after that. Blowout, decompression sickness, the frantic work of the medics, the painful injections. When he woke up, he was in a sterile white room in a dedicated corporate medical facility back on land. Henderson was there, looking pale and grim, along with two men in expensive, tailored suits who radiated cold authority. Leo, Henderson started, avoiding his eyes. You experienced a severe case of high-pressure nervous syndrome. You had a powerful hallucination. There was a catastrophic equipment failure on Marcus's suit, a tragic accident. No, Leo rasped, his throat raw and painful. And there was a creature. It took him. It's on the rig leg at 250 meters. The men in suits exchanged a practiced look. Son, one of them said, his voice as smooth and frictionless as oil. Your camera feed showed nothing but static after a pressure-induced blowout. The only thing the ROV recovered was Marcus's damaged helmet. You've been through a traumatic ordeal. The company has prepared a very generous severance package for you. along with comprehensive psychiatric care, for your silence and for your long-term health. They declared him medically unfit to dive. They bought his silence with a number that would let him live comfortably, but would never let him forget. They buried the truth 250 meters beneath the waves. He took the money. What else could he do? He tried to tell his story once to an online forum, but he was dismissed as a crank, another diver suffering from on the deep's madness and post-traumatic hallucinations. They had the official report. Equipment failure. Case closed. But Leo knows what he saw. He still has the puckered scar on his ankle from where the tendril pierced his suit, a jagged, ugly mark that aches with a phantom cold when a storm rolls in. He stays away from the ocean now. He can't even stand to look at it. Sometimes at night he wakes up from a recurring nightmare. He's back in the crushing darkness, his light failing. He sees a constellation of purple eyes opening in the deep, and he hears that wet, tearing sound. He always wakes up just before the vocalization, his own throat too tight to make a noise. The Triton oil rig is still fully operational. The company reported a minor, unexplained, unbalanced seismic event near the structure a few weeks after his narrow accident, but work continues unabated. They still send divers down there. They just don't send them as deep anymore. They quietly sealed off the lower sections of the rig for all future maintenance, claiming long-term structural instability. But Leo knows the truth. They didn't neutralize it. They couldn't. They just stopped looking at it. And just because you neutralize the lights doesn't mean it's not still down there, growing and waiting. The black mold. The job was deceptively simple on paper. Mold remediation for an old foreclosed house. As a senior technician for Namur Clean Slate Solutions, I'd seen it all, or so I thought. Our van, emblazoned with the cheerful company logo, felt cynically out of place parked before the grim facade. My partner Mark was newer but competent. We arrived at the 2-story Victorian-era home on a gray, overcast Tuesday, the kind of day that promises a long, monotonous job. The air was heavy with the smell of recent rain and decaying leaves. The house itself sagged, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, a portrait of slow decay. Looks like a standard level 3 contamination, Mark commented, pulling his respirator over his face. Spore trap samples I took from the perimeter are already hot. Elevated chatomium and aspergillus for sure, but the Stachybotrys count as astronomical before we've even breached the interior. The fun stuff, I nodded, adjusting my own gear. The faint, sharp scent of ozone from our industrial air scrubbers filled our masks, layered over the low harmonic hum of the HEPA filters working to purify the environment. Hey, let's get the containment barriers up. I want this section sealed tight before we even think about touching anything. Standard procedure. Air scrubbers on full, negative pressure established. I checked the manometer connected to the containment plastic. The differential pressure was holding steady at 0.03 inches of water column. A perfect seal. Logs start now, Zo 9 Zo Der. We worked and practiced silence, our movements efficient. The plastic sheeting went up, sealing the living room from the rest of the house. Pumps hummed, creating the negative air pressure that would keep any disturbed spores from escaping our designated work zone. The source of the problem was obvious. A massive, dark stain that started on the living room ceiling and crawled down the wall like a living thing. It was blacker than any mold I'd ever seen, with a strange, almost iridescent sheen that seemed to drink the light from our headlamps. It wasn't just on the surface. It seemed to pulse from within the plaster itself, a slow, deep throb of blackness. "This is unusual," I said, my voice muffled by the mask. I ran a gloved hand near the surface, feeling a strange coolness emanating from it. It wasn't just cold. The surface was actively drawing heat from my glove, a localized endothermic reaction that defied biology. The structure seems almost crystalline. Mark was already taking readings with a moisture meter. Moisture content is saturated, maxing out the meter. But the thermal scan is weird. It's reading colder than the ambient temperature, significantly. Alex, it's a persistent 6-degree differential. It's like a cold spot in reality itself. None, let's get a sample. I pulled out a sterile collection kit. As I carefully scraped a small amount of the substance into a vial, I noticed a viscous reddish-brown fluid welling up from the spot I'd disturbed. It wasn't part of the mold, but seemed to be trapped behind it. Alex, stand down. Protocol 7.3 requires sample containment before direct interaction. I paused, securing the sample as he was right. My focus was too intense. Sample collected at 0947 hours. I spoke into my comms unit, a habit for my own audio logs. Substance exhibits unusual pigmentation and viscosity. Looks like... I don't know what it looks like. The fluid wasn't the dark residue of decay I was used to. It was something else. It looked unsettlingly like old, clotted dark residue. We continued our work, spraying the affected area with our most potent antimicrobial solution. Usually you see an immediate reaction. The mold starts to break down to discolor. This stuff did nothing. It was like we were spraying water on oil. The blackness seemed to absorb the chemicals without a single change, its iridescent surface glistening under the spray. "Okay, plan B," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mechanical removal. Let's get the scrapers." The plaster was soft, spongy. As we scraped, large chunks came away, revealing the lath and behind it a space that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't the expected wall cavity. It was a dark, narrow crawl space packed with more of the black mold. It coated everything, and the air that puffed out was thick with a coppery sweet smell, like an old butcher shop left to rot. And in the back of the crawl space, illuminated by my headlamp, was a shape. It was a human figure, or what was left of one. It was encased in the same black crystalline substance, its limbs frozen in an unnatural position. The figure wasn't just covered, it was integrated. The crystalline growth wasn't a superficial coating. It was an intricate lattice woven directly into the preserved dermal and epidermal layers. The subject's own biology had been hijacked, repurposed at a cellular level, with the black mold growing out of its open mouth and empty eye sockets like some horrific fungus. I felt a wave of nausea, the professional detachment I'd cultivated over a decade shattering in an instant. "Central, this is Alpha 1, I said, my voice trembling slightly. "We found a deceased individual. Code 1099. We need police and a forensics unit dispatched to our location immediately." Mark stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. "And what the hell? What the hell happened to him?" The figure was desiccated, almost mummified, but the mold around it was vibrant, pulsing with that faint, cold light. It wasn't feeding on the figure. It looked like the figure had become part of it. A host. The comms in my ear crackled. "Alpha 1, what is the nature of the scene?" "Confirmed deceased individual." "Not confirmed," I stammered. "It's a figure. It's compromised. The contamination it's grown over and through it. The scene is not secure. We were ordered to stand down to maintain the containment field and wait for the authorities. The next hour was the longest of my life. We stood in the sealed room, the hum of the air scrubbers the only sound, staring at the macabre monument in the wall. The cloying, sweet smell was getting stronger, and the cold emanating from it seemed to seep into my bones. Then I saw it. A slight tremor ran through the black mold on the figure's chest. A tiny, almost imperceptible pulse. "Mark," I whispered. "Did you see that?" "And see what?" he asked, his eyes wide, never leaving the figure. Another pulse, this time stronger. A crack appeared in the black casing on the figure's face. The coppery smell intensified. Something was shifting inside. A dry, rasping sound echoed from the crawl space, like desiccated lungs trying to draw a breath for the first time in decades. The head of the figure tilted, a slow, jerky movement that was utterly impossible. The mold covering its neck stretched and tore, revealing pale, dry flesh underneath. "It's moving." Mark breathed, a note of pure panic in his voice. "Alex, it's moving!" The figure's jaw dropped open, and a low, guttural moan came out, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't a sound of life, but of something profoundly, horribly wrong. The black mold began to flake away from its body, falling like ash as the figure tried to pull itself free from the wall. Panic set in. This was beyond any protocol. "Central, the situation has changed. The figure is animate. I repeat, the figure is animate." The only response was static. The comms were dead. "Central, confirm reception?" "Switching to backup channel 3, I stated, my thumb tapping the comms unit. Nothing. Communication protocol failure logged at 11:02. The figure tore one arm free from the wall with a sickening crack of old bone and desiccated sinew. The black mold clung to it, writhing as if it were a separate organism. its elbow joint articulated in a way that defied anatomy, dislocating and resetting with a wet, popping sound to provide an unnatural range of motion. It fixed its hollow, mold-filled eyes on us. There was no intelligence there, just a terrifying, single-minded hunger. It began to crawl out of the wall, its movement spidery and broken. "Get back," I yelled, shoving Mark toward the plastic-sheeted doorway. We scrambled out of the containment zone, tearing the zipper open and tumbling into the relative safety of the hallway. I slammed the door to the living room shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. A heavy thud hit the other side of the door, then another. The heavy thuds were punctuated by the sound of the wood frame splintering. The creature, the thing, was trying to get through. A crack appeared in the wood of the old door. "We have to get out of here," Mark yelled, already fumbling with the front door of the house. He threw it open and we spilled out onto the porch, gasping in the clean, cold air. The damp grass was slick under our boots as we sprinted, the air now tainted with that sweet coppery rot that clung to the creature. We didn't stop running until we reached our truck, parked 100 feet down the street. I fumbled for my personal cell, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial 911, as I described the situation in frantic, broken sentences. A low, guttural vocalization echoed from the house. It was louder now, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. Then came the shattering of glass. The living room window exploded outwards, and the figure, now fully free, crawled out. It moved with a horrifying speed, its limbs bending at impossible angles. It landed on the lawn and immediately began to scuttle towards us, its head swiveling, its empty eyes locking onto our position. The black mold covering its body seemed to boil and shift, tendrils of it reaching out as if tasting the air. "It's coming," Mark shrieked. I didn't need the warning. I threw the truck into drive, the tires screeching as we peeled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, I could see the thing standing in the middle of the street, watching us go. It didn't pursue. It just stood there, a black skeletal silhouette against the gray sky. The police, when they finally arrived, found nothing. The house was empty. The living room was a wreck, with a gaping hole in the wall and shattered equipment everywhere. But there was no figure, no dark residue, no sign of the entity we'd released. Even the vast majority of the black mold was gone, leaving only faint, dry stains on the plaster. They found our abandoned gear, the broken containment field, and the hole in the wall. They thought we were on drugs or had concocted an elaborate story to cover for some screw-up that had wrecked the site. My company fired us. Mass hysteric hallucination induced by concentrated mycotoxins, the official report said. A convenient lie that absolved them of any real investigation and protected the company's liability. Mark couldn't handle it. He had a breakdown a week later, raving about the man in the wall and the crawling blackness. He was institutionalized. I was left alone with the memory and the quiet, gnawing fear. I had kept the sample. It sat in its sealed vial in a locked box in my apartment. For weeks I tried to forget about it. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, a shared delusion brought on by stress and exposure to toxic spores. But one night, I couldn't resist. I opened the box. The sample of black mold had changed. It had grown, filling the small vial, and in the center of the black mass, a tiny reddish-brown spot had appeared. It looked like a pinprick of dark residue, dark and viscous. As I watched, holding my breath, it pulsed. A single, slow, rhythmic beat. I started researching old town records, property deeds, anything I could find about the house. I started with digital county archives, cross-referencing property deeds with digitized census data and missing persons reports spanning 150 years. The pattern was faint, obscured by time and bureaucracy, but it was there. The house had a long history with multiple owners, and a recurring pattern of disappearances. Families would move in, and a few years later, one member would vanish without a trace. The others would move out shortly after, selling the house at a loss, citing rare structural issues, or none or bad memories. The last registered owner before the bank foreclosure was a man named Alistair Finch, a recluse, a biologist who, according to a brief newspaper clipping from the 1980s, was studying ulcers, extremophilic fungal species. His obscure published papers were on niche subjects: bioremediation using extremophilic fungi, cellular communication in non-animal organisms, a man obsessed with the idea of symbiosis where none should exist. He had vanished. He was the figure in the wall. He hadn't been neutralized by the mold. He had been trying to cultivate it. He wasn't just studying it. He was trying to engineer and control it, and he had become its first successful harvest. I realized then what the mold was. It wasn't just a fungus. It was a predator, a parasitic organism that used its host's body as a nursery, a womb. It would grow, integrate, and then, when disturbed, it would reanimate the host to act as its vessel, to seek a new place to infest, a new body to claim. The presence that I felt in that house wasn't a restless spirit. It was the chilling, ancient intelligence of the mold itself. I looked back at the vial on my desk. The pulsating red dot was slightly larger now. The fear that had been a dull ache in my chest became a sharp, cold spike. The police didn't believe me. My company had disavowed me. Mark was gone. I was the only one who knew the truth. The figure we released is out there. It's not a shambling monster. It's a delivery system. It's looking for a new home, a new wall to hide within, a new place to take root. It could be anywhere. Maybe it will find a damp basement, a leaky attic, a dark and forgotten corner in a house just like yours. I have to find a way to neutralize it. I have the sample. I know its nature. Alistair Finch was a biologist. He must have kept notes, research hidden somewhere. If I can find them, I might be able to develop a counteragent, something that can actually neutralize the organism. This is no longer a remediation job. It's a hunt. The sample is the key, the only object I have to work with. It's my Rosetta Stone and my Pandora's box. Every day, the thing in my vial grows a little more. And every day, I look at the dark corners of my own apartment and wonder if I'm already too late. I check my walls, my ceiling, sniffing the air for that coppery, sweet smell, knowing that I am the only one standing between it and its next victim. The hunt is on, but I have the unnerving feeling that I'm not the only one doing the hunting. Resonance Cascade, log entry 135804 Zulu. The snowcat bearing the new replacement growled its way over the horizon, a lone black speck against the blinding white of the polar expanse. At Outpost Agartha, arrivals were a rare and disruptive event. We were a skeleton crew of 4, each a specialist in our field, tasked with monitoring the deep Earth resonance patterns beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, a job title that sounded far grander than the reality. The reality was a monotonous existence in a concrete box buried under a mile of ice, listening to the planet's subtle hums. For 8 months, the rhythm of our lives had been governed by the drone of the atmospheric recycler, the hiss of the glycol heaters, and the silent, crushing pressure of 1,000,000 tons of ice. Elias Vance was a comms technician, a last-minute requisition sent to replace Ben, whose appendix had staged a rather dramatic and untimely protest 2 weeks prior. He stepped out of the vehicle's heated cabin, a tall, gaunt man with eyes that seemed too wide for his face, taking in the brutalist concrete lines of the station as if it were a cathedral. Station Chief Kale, a man whose personality was as stark and practical as our habitat, gave him the cursory welcome, a firm handshake and a muttered, "Try not to break anything we can't fix." I'm Aris, the lead systems analyst. My job is to make sense of the endless streams of data from the spectroseismic array, to find the tune in the planet's geological noise. Lena, our geologist, watched the new arrival with a guarded curiosity from the entrance to the core lab, her face betraying nothing. This tight-knit ecosystem was about to be disturbed. Elias was quiet for the first 2 days. He learned the station's labyrinthine layout, checked in with Kale, and spent most of his time sealed in the comms room, running diagnostics on the primary deep space array. The quiet was fine. The quiet was normal. In the crushing isolation of Agartha, you learn to appreciate the absence of unnecessary noise. On the 3rd day, the humming started. It was low, almost subliminal at first. A simple, looping 3-note melody repeated ad infinitum. I first heard it in the mess hall during the 18-auto meal cycle. Elias was staring blankly at a bowl of reconstituted protein paste, humming. Just humming. The sound felt alien in the sterile environment of white tables and stainless steel. "Catchy tune," Lena, our geologist, remarked from across the table, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Elias didn't seem to hear her. He just kept humming, his fork hovering motionless over his food, a statue mid-motion. The sound was strange. It wasn't just the endless repetition. It was the pitch. It seemed to sit just at the edge of a frequency that made your teeth ache, a low thrum that felt like it was coming from inside your own skull, vibrating through the jawbone, By evening, we could all hear it. A faint, persistent undertone to the station's own mechanical symphony, a discordant note in a familiar song. The next day, it was louder. I was in my workstation, trying to calibrate the seismic sensors for a new deep field scan, but the hum was a constant, maddening distraction. It was like a needle skipping on a record, a broken piece of code in an otherwise perfect system. It frayed the edges of my concentration. I found Lena in the Ice Core lab, her noise-canceling headphones clamped so tightly over her ears they were leaving red marks, her expression a mask of frustration. The air in the lab tasted of chilled minerals, and the fine, dry dust from the core samples coated my fingertips with a gritty film when I touched her console. "I can't work with that noise," she snapped, gesturing vaguely in the direction of the comms room without looking at me. "It's like it's drilling into my brain. I've mislogged 2 stratification depths already. It's unacceptable." I decided supervisory intervention was required. I went to see Kale. The station chief was a man carved from pragmatism and Arctic ice, and he was in his natural habitat, his office, a cramped space dominated by monitors displaying supply manifests and structural integrity readouts. His face was illuminated by the green glow of a monitor. "Sir, it's about Elias." Kale didn't look up from a spreadsheet detailing our water recycling efficiency. "What about him? Is the array down? We're expecting a data burst from McMurdo at 0400. No, sir, he's humming. Constantly. It's starting to affect the crew's morale and concentration. It's becoming a safety issue." Kyle finally looked at me, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "A humming man is hardly a priority, Aris. We have a pressure ridge forming to the west that could threaten the sub-level labs. I need you focused on structural integrity models, not choir practice." "With respect, sir, continuous psychoacoustic disturbance is a documented stressor. Protocol for crew welfare was violated at Oro 940 when the subject refused to cease the activity upon request." My voice was tight, clinical. "Lena can't focus. I can't focus. It's a problem." Kel let out a long, weary sigh, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Fine, I'll talk to him. But for God's sake, Aris, find a real problem to solve." The talk, if it ever happened, had no effect. The humming continued, and on day 5, the station itself began to react. The lights in the mess hall flickered and died during dinner, plunging us into absolute darkness for a full 10 seconds. A wave of static electricity seemed to wash over the room, raising the hairs on my arms and making my teeth buzz. The faint, acrid smell of ozone, a precursor to electrical failure, hung sharply in the air long after the backup lights flickered on. Through it all, Elias's humming didn't falter. In the sudden, shocked silence between the main power failing and the emergency system kicking in, the 3-note melody was perfectly clear, rhythmic and unwavering. Ben, our short-lived engineer, had left his meticulous notes, and I was a decent troubleshooter. I spent the next few hours in a freezing service crawl space, checking the conduits for Grid B. The cold metal leached heat from my fingers even through my gloves. System log 214711. Transient power surge of unknown origin logged, localized to Grid B duration, 1.3 seconds. Amplitude, 40%. No corresponding hardware faults detected in subroutines 4 through 9. Anomalous. Archiving for later analysis. The power relays were fine. The backups were fine. There was no logical reason for the outage. The next morning, the water reclamation system went into a violent feedback loop, the main pump cycling on and off every 3 seconds with a percussive slam that echoed through the entire station's plumbing. It was the same rhythm as the humming. I had to perform a full manual override at the primary control junction, shutting it down and resetting the entire purification tank, costing us 2 hours of processing time. Elias was in the corridor when I finished, wiping grease and condensation from my hands. He stood there, his head cocked to one side as if listening to a distant conversation. "Systems are unstable," he said, his first unsolicited words in days. His voice was flat, emotionless, a monotone delivery system. The humming continued, a low thrum from his chest. "I'm aware, Elias," I said, my patience worn to a microscopic thread. "Any idea what's causing it?" Elias just smiled, a slight unnerving upward twitch of his lips that held no warmth. "Resonance." And then he walked away, his humming filling the narrow metallic hallway again, seeming to vibrate the very walls. That's when I knew. A cold spike of dread pierced through my analytical mind. I wasn't a geologist, but I had spent 8 months staring at seismic data. I knew what resonance was. It's when a small, repeated vibration matches the natural frequency of a larger system, causing it to oscillate with catastrophic energy. A single soldier marching in step can bring down a bridge. A simple tune can shatter a wine glass. I ran to my workstation, fingers flying across my keyboard, pulling up the logs from the past 24 hours. The power flicker, the water pump cycle. I analyzed the frequency of the events. The power outage was a single, sharp pulse. The water reclamation cycle had a frequency of 0.33 hertz. I then opened an audio analysis program and, using a directional microphone, I swiped from the comms room. Took a discrete sample of Elias's humming from down the hall. I filtered out the station's background noise, isolating the pure 3-note melody. The periodicity of the main note was exactly 0.33 hertz, a perfect match. Log update, 11:32 50 confirmed acoustic to systemic frequency match. Subject Elias Vance is generating an acoustic signal at 0.33 hertz. This frequency directly correlates with the malfunction cycle of the water reclamation pump. Hypothesis: subject is intentionally inducing resonance failure in station systems. This is not a malfunction. This is a targeted event. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a cause. He was somehow affecting the station systems with that song. I took my findings to Kale. This time I didn't wait to be invited in. I slapped a data tablet onto the chief's desk, displaying the matching waveforms, the damning evidence, and stark glowing lines. It's him, Kale, the humming. It's resonating with the station's electrical grid. He's causing these failures. Kyle stared at the data, his ingrained skepticism warring with the undeniable evidence on the screen. That's impossible. The systems are shielded. Faraday cages, EM dampers, the works. Not from this. This is like a targeted acoustic object. It's not a brute force attack. It's a key unlocking a specific vibrational frequency. He's finding the resonant frequency of each system and singing to it until it breaks. Before Kale could answer, a high-pitched alarm blared through the station, a synthetic shriek designed to cut through sleep and complacency. A red light flashed on Kale's main console. Critical alert, seismic event detected. They both ran to the geology lab. Lena was already there, her face bone white, her hands flying over her keyboard. "It's not an earthquake," she said, her voice trembling. "The P waves and S waves are completely asynchronous. The energy signature is coherent. It isn't geological noise, it's a structured signal. Deep, directly beneath us." On the main screen, a topographical map of the bedrock thousands of feet below them was lit up. A single point right under the station, pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm. I felt a cold dread wash over me. I brought up the audio analysis of Elias's tune on a side monitor and overlaid its frequency with the incoming seismic data. The rhythm was identical. The melody was a perfect match. "My God," Lena whispered. "He's not singing to the station." I finished her thought, the words tasting like ash. "He's singing to whatever is down there." The humming from the corridor stopped. For the first time in 3 days, there was silence. But it was a heavy, pregnant silence, far more terrifying than the noise it replaced. Then came a new sound, a low, grinding vibration that came not through our ears, but up through the concrete floor, through the soles of our boots. The entire station shuddered. Jars of core samples rattled in their racks. A hairline crack spiderwebbed across the reinforced glass of the lab window. "Elias!" Kale roared, grabbing a heavy-duty flashlight from an emergency locker, the closest thing to an object he could grab.
"Find him now!"
Lena and I scrambled out of the lab. The main corridor was empty. The humming was gone, but the deep earth vibration was growing stronger, the intervals between the shutters shortening into a sickening rhythm. We found him standing in the center of the dome's observation deck, a transparent bubble of polymer looking out over the endless, dead white ice. He wasn't humming anymore. His arms were outstretched, his head tilted back, his eyes closed. He was listening, a beatific expression on his gaunt face. "Elias, what have you done?" I shouted, my voice nearly lost in the low-frequency roar that vibrated my teeth. Elias opened his eyes. They were no longer the wide, vacant eyes of the man who had arrived 5 days ago. They were ancient and knowing, and they glowed with a faint internal blue light that matched the deep ice glow from Lena's oldest core samples. "Not done," he whispered, his voice a chorus of dissonant frequencies as if multiple voices were speaking at once from his throat. Beginning. Can you hear it? It's been sleeping for so long. It's so hungry. Outside, under the pale Antarctic sun, the ice began to change. A web of black cracks radiated outwards from a point 100 yards from the station. It wasn't the natural cracking of shifting ice. It was the splintering of something breaking from within. The vibration intensified into a violent rhythmic tremor. System alert. Hull integrity compromised. Sector Gamma. The station groaned, the sound of tortured metal being twisted to its breaking point. Kyle stormed onto the deck, the heavy flashlight raised like a club. Step away from the console, Vance. Elias turned his head, a slow, unnatural movement, his neck seeming to rotate too far. He can't hear you. He's just the radio. The song is almost over. His lips curled into that terrible smile again, and the listener is awake. A deafening crack, louder than any thunder, echoed across the ice plain. A fissure a mile long tore open the ice sheet. It wasn't a natural crevasse. It was a sharp geometric fracture, impossibly straight, as if the world's biggest pane of glass had just been struck by a hammer. From the dark depths, a wave of pressure and a sound that was not a sound, a psychic vocalization of pure malevolent triumph, washed over the station. It was a data spike to the brain, a burst of raw alien intent. It shattered every window, blew out every monitor in a shower of sparks, and threw the three of us across the room like dolls. I slammed against a bulkhead, my vision swimming in strobing after-images. The last thing I saw before the emergency shutters slammed down, plunging us into absolute ringing darkness, was Elias still standing bathed in a profound, deep blue light that pulsed up from the fractured ice. The deep earth vibration was gone, replaced by a new rhythm, a steady planetary heartbeat, and in the darkness a new voice joined the cacophony in my mind, not humming, but whispering a single star-chilling word over and over, a name. And I knew, with the chilling certainty of a systems analyst who has finally seen the presence in the machine, that our little outpost was no longer a research station. It was now an amplifier, a beacon, and something ancient and vast was using that beacon to call home. The presence from below the ice wasn't just awake. It was answering. I could feel its approach not as a tremor in the ground, but as a corruption in the very code of reality, a glitch in the fabric of the world. The station's purpose had been to listen. Now it was a platform from which to speak. Elias was not a technician sent to fix our comms. He was a herald, sent to establish a new connection, and the call had just been answered. The air in the deep-level containment lab, 3 miles beneath the Pacific seabed, hummed with a meticulously engineered thrum. It was the sound of redundant filtration systems, quantum-entangled comms relays, and the constant low-frequency reassurance of negative pressure generators. A symphony of safety. Eris Thorne had long ago learned to associate it with control. A constant that meant the horrors curated within these walls remained inside. He stood before the triple laminated polycarbonate of Unit 7, his reflection a distorted, bulky figure in the dark green Class 4 hazmat suit. The air he breathed, scrubbed and recycled, carried the faint, acrid tang of aerosolized parasitic acid, a sterile scent meant to be reassuring but which always reminded him of the potential for contamination. His own breath, cycled through the respirator, was a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to the lab's hum, its cadence displayed as a waveform on his helmet's HUD. 15. Primary systems nominal. Secondary filtration pressure at 98.7% capacity. Inside the specimen, designated XB7, quivered. It was a gelatinous, subconsciously pulsating mass of unknown origin, its surface shimmering with an oily iridescence under the sterile, unwavering glow of the full-spectrum LEDs. Recovered 6 months prior from a hydrothermal vent in the Mariana Trench, a high-pressure, high-temperature environment where complex biology was considered a theoretical impossibility. This thing was a living refutation of a dozen different textbooks. Its very existence was a violation. Vital signs readout? Eris asked, his voice a tinny, filtered broadcast through the suit's internal comms. The words appeared as a clean transcription on the lower left corner of his helmet's display. Portaven Thur, subroutine 7B check. Status inconclusive. Manual confirmation required. His assistant, Lena Petrova, A brilliant xenobiologist who had been his staunchest collaborator for 5 years didn't look away from her console. A dozen different graphs and data streams, cellular respiration, bioelectric field variance, mass-to-energy conversion rates, scrolled across her panoramic displays. Vitals are within designated parameters, Doctor. Holding steady. However, Biomonitor 4 shows a K-value anomaly. The cellular division rate has exceeded standard deviation. Protocol breach logged at 1452. Eris felt a familiar knot of cold dread tighten his stomach, a visceral sensation that no amount of professional detachment could ever fully suppress. This wasn't merely a biological curiosity. XB7 represented a potential extinction-level event, contained for now in a state-of-the-art box. 5015, log entry, K-value acceleration noted. Monitoring shift to high alert. The specimen had already demonstrated an alarming, almost physics-defying ability to mimic and absorb organic material. The lab rat they'd introduced during initial testing yesterday, test subject R41, had been deconstructed. The final report simply noted a complete biomass integration event, a sterile phrase for a process that had seen the rodent's atoms, its very informational essence, become part of the quivering opalescent mass. He could still recall the data from the event, a brief spike in the specimen's mass and a momentary phantom registration on the biomonitor of a rodent's panicked heart rate from inside the creature. Alarm, alarm, alarm. Code black. The klaxon blared. A jarring, ear-splitting shriek that cut through the monotonous hum with the violence of tearing metal. Emergency red light strobed across the sterile white walls and brushed titanium fixtures, painting the room in frantic, repeating strokes of crimson. The HUD in Eris's helmet flashed with a single massive notification that overrode all other data. Containment breach. Primary barrier failure. Unit 7. Containment breach. Unit 7 wall integrity is compromised. Lena shouted, her voice tight with adrenaline but still holding a thread of her training. The professional veneer was shattering like a dropped beaker. A thick, black tendril, no wider than a pencil and glistening as if coated in crude oil, had forced its way through a microscopic fissure in the containment unit's primary adamantium composite seal. Subsequent analysis would show it hadn't broken the seal, but unexisted a path through it via localized quantum tunneling. The tendril writhed in the open air, its tip wavering as if tasting, sensing, processing the new environment's chemical composition. Before the lab's automated defense turrets could even register the nature of the breach, it whipped out with impossible speed, crossing the 10 feet to Lena's console in a fraction of a second. She let out a short, choked vocalization as the tip, now sharpened to a monomolecular point, pierced her hazmat suit at the soft neck seal. She clawed at it, a futile, instinctual gesture. Her movements became jerky, spastic. In seconds, she collapsed to the tiled floor. Her body began to convulse violently, a horrifying seizure that was not biological but physical, as if she were being dismantled from the inside out. Her form began to dephase, dissolving in a horrifying slurry of organic matter being pulled by an unseen kinetic force toward the fissure in Unit 7. Eris stumbled back, his mind a maelstrom of shock and protocol. He watched the readouts for Lena's biometric sensor on his HUD flicker, then flatline. 4548 biometric signal. Lost L. Petrova. Alert. Life signs absent. He lurched toward the main control panel, his gloved hand reaching for the emergency asset neutralization switch, a heavy red pressure-activated button shielded by a clear plastic cover. This was the kill switch for the lab, flooding the containment unit with plasma. He flipped the cover and slammed his palm down, but the satisfying mechanical click of activation never came. A red error light blinked on the panel. System offline. Manual override disabled. Error. Command line access denied. Source. XB7 Bioconsole Root Admin. The specimen had already infiltrated the lab's network through the containment unit's internal sensors. It was systematically and intelligently cutting them off. He watched in abject horror as the specimen finished absorbing Lena, the mass inside the tank swelling visibly, its iridescence shifting to include a fleeting human-like pattern within its depths. The tendril retracted, and then the entire reinforced polycarbonate wall began to crack, a spider web of fractures spreading from the point of the breach. The low hum of the lab was now completely overshadowed by the high-pitched, harmonic squeal of stressed material giving way to a force it was never designed to withstand. Panic, cold and absolute, finally broke through his training. 1456-50. Personnel biomonitor alert. A. Thorne. Tachycardia. Respiration rate exceeds safe limits. He was the only one left in the hot zone. The security team was on the other side of a 12-inch thick titanium blast door that wouldn't unseal until the quarantine protocol was either successfully completed or manually lifted. A protocol that was now critically, irrevocably failing. He was trapped with an intelligent predator that had just consumed his colleague and friend. He scanned the lab for an object, anything. A fire extinguisher, a heavy-duty torque wrench left on a service cart. His eyes locked onto a discarded sample collection probe, a 3-foot-long titanium rod with a sharpened, diamond-hardened tip, designed for taking core samples from hostile biosignatures. It wasn't designed to be an object for defense, but it was solid. It was real. He scrambled for it, his knuckles white inside his gloves as he gripped the cold, heavy tool. With a final explosive pop, the wall of Unit 7 shattered, exploding outward in a deafening shower of razor-sharp fragments that pinged harmlessly off his suit's outer layer. The specimen oozed onto the lab floor, a glistening, amorphous blob of midnight black that began to spread and coalesce, pulling itself into a roughly humanoid shape with sickening, unnatural speed. It was a grotesque parody of a person, its surface shifting and churning with the half-formed faces of its previous victims. The lab rat. Other test animals. Their silent vocalizations trapped forever in its gelatinous flesh. For a gut-wrenching moment, Lena's face surfaced, her eyes wide with an agony that transcended death, before melting back into the protean mass. Eris knew with chilling certainty that he couldn't neutralize it, not with this primitive object. His only chance, the facility's only hope, was the central override console in the adjacent server room. From there, he could bypass the creature's control and trigger a full system purge. Protocol 9 Omega. It was the ultimate failsafe, flooding the entire laboratory wing with a hyper-corrosive, self-replicating catalytic agent designed to break down any and all complex organic matter to its constituent atoms. It would neutralize him too, but it would stop the specimen from reaching the sublevels above, from reaching the ocean, from reaching the world. He bolted for the server room door, his heavy boots slapping against the sterile tiles. The thing moved behind him with preternatural speed and silence. It didn't run. It flowed, a silent, dark tide of living hunger. He could hear a wet slapping sound punctuated by sharp clicks, the sound of semi-coagulated appendages forming and reforming on the floor. It was a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his very short life. He fumbled at his belt with a shaking hand for his level 5 keycard. He pressed it against the scanner. The light flashed an agonizing red twice before the system recognized the credential. 45810. Access granted, server room 3C. The door hissed open. He scrambled inside, immediately slamming the large illuminated button to close it. The heavy steel door began to slide shut, but a black tendril, thicker this time, shot through the shrinking gap. It coiled around his ankle with crushing force. The pain was immediate and immense. A burning cold that seeped into his bones as the creature's chemistry began to attack the suit and the flesh beneath. Eris yelled, a raw, desperate sound, kicking at the tendril with his free foot. He could feel it pulling him, the proprietary polymer of his boot smoking and dissolving into black sludge. 1458-35. Suit integrity warning. Left leg compromised. Ambient atmosphere detected. Biohazard exposure imminent. With a final, desperate heave fueled by pure adrenaline, he swung the metal probe down like an axe onto the captured limb. The sharpened tip sheared through the tendril. A dark, viscous residue, thick like oil, splattered across the floor in his leg. The air filled with the sharp, metallic scent of ozone and something else. Something sickeningly sweet like rotten fruit and burnt sugar. The severed appendage spasmed on the floor, then collapsed into a puddle of inert black goo. 1458, me weiter. The door clicked shut, the heavy magnetic locks engaging with a definitive thud. He was sealed inside, safe for a few moments. He didn't waste a second. Ignoring the searing pain in his leg, he limped toward the central console. The specimen was already pounding on the outside of the door, the thick metal groaning and visibly denting under the force of its blows. It wasn't just brute force. It was systematic, striking the lock mechanisms and hinge points, testing for weaknesses. He logged into the console, his fingers flying across the virtual interface. Emergency systems, containment protocols, execute 9 Omega. A calm robotic voice devoid of any emotion echoed through the small humming room. Warning, protocol. Omega is irreversible. All biological life forms in sectors. Alpha through Gamma will be neutralized. Confirmation required. Voice print acknowledgement. Acknowledge. Eris Thorne, confirm and execute, he shouted, his voice cracking. Voice print confirmed. Protocol 9 Omega initiated. System purge will commence in T-minus 60 seconds. All personnel must evacuate to designated safe zones immediately. Evacuate. The irony was a bitter pill. Through a small reinforced polycarbonate porthole in the door, he could see the creature. It had reformed its mass, pressing against the steel, and was now hammering the door with what looked like a makeshift fist, dense and knotted. It was learning. Evolving at a terrifying rate, then the pounding stopped. Fairmont 05. A terrifying, profound silence descended, broken only by the calm countdown from the speakers. System purge in T-minus 30 seconds. Eris watched the porthole, his breath held tight in his chest, the rhythmic puff of his respirator the only sound he could make. A shape began to form in the window. A face. It wasn't Lena's this time. It wasn't the rat's, it was his own. A perfect, glistening copy of his face, right down to the small scar on his chin from a childhood fall, pressed against the polycarbonate. It smiled at him, a wide, predatory, impossibly flexible grin that his own muscles could never, ever replicate. Its eyes, perfect copies of his own blue eyes, held an ancient, malevolent intelligence that made his blood run cold. It knew him down to minus 10, 9, 8. The voice was placid, indifferent. The final seconds ticked away. Aris closed his eyes, his mission complete. He thought of the sun, of blue skies, of a world that would continue turning, never knowing how close it came to being devoured from the inside out by a presence from the abyss. He wondered if this thing could feel fear. In its last moments, he truly hoped so. 4, 3, deuce gun. Purge sequence complete, the robotic voice announced. A loud, multi-tonal hiss filled the air as vents in the ceiling opened. A pale green, ethereal mist shimmering with its own internal light flooded the corridor outside. Through his eyelids, Eris saw a flash of brilliant, verdant light. He forced his eyes open for one last look. The specimen's copy of his face on the other side of the glass contorted, not in pain but in what looked like profound curiosity, its features melting asymmetrically before it, and everything else was consumed by the corrosive, cleansing fog. Eris took one last burning breath as the green mist began to seep under the server room door, and he knew no more. The pressure logs 0215, AL-3 submersible Triton commencing descent. Pilot, Alex Croft. Mission, emergency structural weld on the Tartarus 7 pipeline manifold. Depth 2,800 meters. Operator, surface control. The only world that mattered was the 3-foot bubble of titanium and acrylic that surrounded Alex. Beyond that, there was only the abyss, a term the surface dwellers used with a romantic flair that felt insulting. To Alex, it was just the worksite, a cold, dark, high-pressure factory floor where the margin for error was zero. His submersible, the Triton, was less a vessel and more a heavily armored tool, and he was the hand that guided it. Log 023118, passing 1,800 meters. External pressure now 18.2 MPa. Hull strain sensors report nominal compression. He felt the submersible's systems as extensions of his own body. The faint, low-frequency vibration of the active sonar array hummed up through the control yoke, a tactile pulse against his palms as the machine relentlessly pinged the surrounding void. The cockpit was a familiar prison of flickering lights and humming machinery. The digital depth gauge on his main console ticked downwards with unnerving steadiness. 2,500 meters, 2,600, 2,700. Each new number was another layer of crushing reality. An exponential increase in the weight of the water trying to turn his little sphere into a single dense point. The air tasted sterile and recycled, a constant reminder of the thin membrane of technology keeping him alive. A low groan echoed through the hull, the familiar sound of the titanium alloy frame compressing under the immense, indifferent weight of the ocean. Triton, this is surface. You're approaching the target zone. Readings on the manifold show the pressure leak is getting worse. We need that seal, Alex. Time is critical. A voice, tinny and distant, crackled through his headset. Copy that, Surface. I see the target now, Alex replied, his voice a flat monotone. Commencing approach to Tartarus 7, lights on. He flicked the switch. The acrid smell of ozone from an overworked electrical relay tickling his nostrils. A sharp scent that even the advanced air scrubbers couldn't fully eliminate. Massive LED floodlights on the Triton's exterior blazed to life, cutting a cone of sterile white through the absolute primordial blackness. The light caught swirling particles of marine snow, a perpetual blizzard in the deep. Then the worksite resolved itself from the murk. The Tartarus 7 pipeline manifold was a titanic piece of engineering, a knot of pipes and valves the size of a small building, utterly alien in the natural landscape of the seafloor. A complex node of carbon steel and specialized alloys. It was the heart of a multi-billion-dollar operation, now threatened by a pinhole fracture. The floodlights revealed the point of failure, CMG-14, which was weeping a thin, faint stream that was instantly dissipated by the pressure. I have visual on the compromised seam, Alex reported, his hands moving with practiced efficiency across the control panel. Deploying manipulator arms where 2 robotic arms unfolded from the Triton's body like the limbs of a patient insect. One was a gripper, the other fitted with a high-intensity plasma welder. It was a delicate, dangerous dance he'd performed 100 times before. Scrape away the damaged material, apply the fresh weld, and pray the new seal held against pressures that could pulverize bone to dust. Log 0347-12. Logging visual anomaly. Unidentified humanoid contact, range 20 meters, bearing 035. No heat signature registered. As he maneuvered the plasma welder closer to the pipe, a flicker of movement at the edge of his lights caught his eye. He paused. It was nothing. A trick of the light. A deep-sea creature startled by his sudden appearance. He'd seen strange things down here. Translucent squids with bioluminescent organs, anglerfish with their hypnotic lures. But this was different. It moved again. Not like a fish. It was vertical, slow, deliberate. Alex swiveled the Triton, pointing the floodlights directly at the movement. And then he saw it. Standing on the seafloor, seemingly unaffected by the crushing pressure and the freezing cold, was a person. Or something that looked like one. It was wearing an old, bulky diving suit. The kind with a large brass helmet, the sort not used in over a century. The suit was dark, coated in silt and marine growth. It just stood there, motionless, its single round porthole of a faceplate staring directly at him. Alex's heart hammered against his ribs. It was impossible. A hallucination? Nitrogen narcosis? Unlikely at this depth with his trimix breathing gas, but not impossible. He ran a self-diagnostic on his life support display. All green. O2 levels optimal. CO2 scrubbers functioning at 99.7% efficiency. Brainwave activity stable. He then diverted processing power to the sensor suite, triple-checking the external camera feeds against the raw data from the multi-beam sonar. He even ran a spectral analysis on the light passing through the main port camera. The result was a digital flatline. No unorthodox photonic signature, no thermal variance, no mass displacement registered by the gravimeter, just the calculated ambient light from his own floodlights reflecting off standard marine particulates. Surface, do you have anything on sonar? Any other contacts in my vicinity? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Negative, Triton. Sonar is clear. You're the only signal for 50 clicks. Everything okay? Stand by, Alex muttered. He cycled the external cameras, rebooting the sonar display. Nothing. The system showed empty water where the figure stood, but his eyes didn't lie. It was still there, a silent, impossible sentinel in the abyss. The figure took a step towards him, then another. Its movements were slow, ponderous as if it were wading through thick tar. It wasn't walking on the sea floor so much as it was simply advancing. No jets of propulsion, no disturbance in the water. That just moved. Surface, I am logging a visual contact, or Alex said, his voice tight. Humanoid in form, wearing an antiquated diving suit. It is not showing up on any of my instruments. I repeat, I have a visual-only contact, and it is approaching my position. A pause on the other end, longer than usual. Triton, be advised, non-procedural communication logged at 0352. Your biotelemetry is anomalous. Cardiac rate exceeds mission parameters by 18%. Reconfirm status, pilot, then it's It's right in front of me, Alex whispered. The figure was now less than 10 feet from the Triton's viewport. He could see details on the ancient suit, the corroded brass of the helmet, the tattered canvas of the suit, the way the dark water seemed to cling to it. The round glass of its faceplate was black, opaque. There was nothing to see inside, then it raised a hand. The movement was impossibly slow, yet inexorable. It reached out and touched the acrylic of the viewport. Tap. The sound was tiny, sharp, and utterly terrifying. A sound that shouldn't exist. Nothing should be able to touch his sub with that kind of solid impact. The pressure should have turned it into paste. Tap. Tap. Alex recoiled, his chair rolling back and hitting the rear of the cockpit. His breath hitched. His training, his years of experience, all of it evaporated in a wash of pure, primal fear. Surface, I am being contacted by the entity. It's touching the sub. And Alex, what are you talking about? There's nothing there. Your sensors are clear. Crack. The sound was like a gunshot in the confined space. A thin white line appeared on the viewport, right where the figure's hand rested. A fracture. Alex stared at it in horror. The acrylic was 3 inches thick, designed to withstand the weight of an ocean. It could not crack. It was impossible. Alarms blared, a piercing digital shriek for hull integrity failure. The main console flashed red. Class 3 stress fracture, port viewport integrity compromised, 17%. Caution. A spiderweb of catastrophic potential grew with every passing second. The figure outside did not move. Its hand remained pressed against the glass, and the crack slowly spread outwards. A beautiful, deadly frost flower. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Alex yelled, his professionalism shattered. My viewport is compromised. Hull breach is imminent. I need an emergency ascent. We can't, Alex, you'll get the bends. You have to equalize. There's no time. He shot back, his vocalization raw. This thing? It's breaking through. Panic gave way to a cold, desperate survival instinct. The mission was over. The pipeline was irrelevant. He was in a can at the bottom of the sea, and something was trying to get in. He looked at his controls. The manipulator arms. The plasma welder. It was not a tool anymore. It was an object. His hands flew across the console, rerouting auxiliary power to the plasma cutter. The low hum inside the cockpit rose to a high-pitched whine as he bypassed the safety protocols, pushing the energy output to 150% of its standard operational limit. The safety overrides screamed in protest on his console, but he silenced them with a flick of his thumb. He swiveled the arm until the welder's nozzle was aimed directly at the figure. The figure began to push. The cracking sound intensified, the web of fractures spreading across the viewport like lightning. Water began to seep in, a fine, atomized mist that hissed as it hit the electronic consoles. His ears popped. The mist of incoming seawater was getting thicker. It would only be a few seconds before the viewport imploded, and he would be turned into a cloud of vapor and dark residue in less than a millisecond. Get away from me. Alex snarled, his finger hovering over the activation switch. The figure pushed harder. The entire submersible groaned. He could feel the pressure changing in the tiny cabin. The pressure differential reading for the cabin began to tick upward, infinitesimally at first. From 1.0 ATM to 1.001, he slammed the button. A beam of pure white-hot energy erupted from the welder. It hit the figure square in the chest. There was no sound, but the water in front of the beam instantly boiled, a roiling cloud of superheated steam. The figure was engulfed in the plasma. For a moment it was illuminated from within, a black silhouette against a miniature sun. The ancient diving suit glowed red, then white. The figure didn't burn. It didn't melt. It just faded, like a projection when the lamp is turned off. One moment it was there, wreathed in plasma, and the next it was gone. The water cleared. There was nothing but the silent, swirling marine snow. The cracking on the viewport stopped. The hissing of the leak continued, a steady, ominous sound. Alex sat there panting, his body trembling. The cockpit was filled with a cold, damp fog. Warning lights flashed on every console. Hull integrity at 12%. Life support failing, dot surface where he gasped into his headset. The contact is gone. I've neutralized it. But the Triton is critically damaged. I have to get out of here. We're reading you, Alex, the voice from the surface said. now laced with an awe and terror he'd never heard before. We saw the energy spike. What was it? What the hell was down there with you? Alex stared out at the empty, oppressive darkness beyond his fractured viewport. I don't know, he said, his voice hollow. But it's not on the charts. Log, SO5 Q10 and 45. Hostile neutralized. Catastrophic damage to submersible. Life support at 18% and falling. Commencing emergency ascent against protocol. Mission incomplete. The ascent was a controlled nightmare. Every groan of the damaged hull was a data point in a terrifying equation of failure. He tracked the fracture's slow propagation on a secondary monitor, watching the calculated time to implosion fluctuate with every change in ascent, speed, and pressure. He bypassed every safety warning, pushing the battered Triton far beyond its limits. He surfaced miles off course, his power failing, his air almost gone. The debriefing was a sterile, quiet affair in a windowless room. The company men, the engineers, the psychologists, they all listened with polite, impassive faces. They looked at the Triton's data logs, which showed nothing. They looked at the telemetry, which showed his own vital signs going berserk. They looked at the viewport with its inexplicable, impossible cracks. They classified the event and wrote their report. The official conclusion, filed under Submersible Incident TR-7AC1, cited pilot overexertion and acute psychological distress due to extreme environmental factors. The inexplicable energy spike from the welder was logged as a catastrophic power surge due to seawater intrusion into the primary conduit. The cracks in the viewport, after weeks of analysis in a vacuum chamber, were officially attributed to a pre-existing, undetectable microdefect in the acrylic polymer, exacerbated by rapid thermal changes during the emergency ascent. It was a neat, tidy explanation that accounted for everything except the impossible truth Alex guarded in his memory. They commended him for his neon perceived bravery and put him on paid medical leave, indefinitely. But Alex knew what he saw. He would close his eyes to sleep and see a brass helmet and a single black faceplate. He would hear the tiny, insistent tapping against the glass. Weeks later, he was in a maritime museum, drawn there by a morbid curiosity he couldn't explain. He wandered through the exhibits of old ships and diving equipment, and then he saw it in a dusty glass case, an old commercial deep-sea diving suit from the late 19th century. Brass helmet, canvas suit, lead-soled boots. Next to it was a yellowed newspaper clipping. Tragedy at Sea, 1889. The headline read, "Diver lost during telegraph cable repair." The article told the story of a man named Thomas Renner, a diver whose airline was severed during a deep-water operation. His figure was lost to the crushing depths. They were never able to recover the body. The location of the accident was listed. It was the same abyssal plain where the Tartarus 7 pipeline now rested. Alex felt a cold dread wash over him, colder than the deepest trench. He looked at the A photo of Renner in the newspaper, a grim-faced man with determined eyes. That night, the nightmares were worse. He dreamt he was back in the Triton, but the cockpit was filling with icy water. He could hear the tapping, louder now, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. He would jolt awake, his heart pounding, the sound still echoing in his ears. He started hearing it when he was awake, a faint tapping on his bedroom window at night, a soft rapping on his apartment door when no one was there. Sometimes he would press his ear against the cold glass of his window, straining to hear. The sound was not just a tapping. It had a wet, muffled quality, like a knuckle rapping against glass from underwater. He knew it was the presence, the thing from the deep. Thomas Renner, a century-dead man still trying to get out of the cold, still trying to get in. One evening he sat in his darkened living room, the city lights a distant, meaningless glow. He would check the locks on his doors and windows repeatedly, not out of fear of a human intruder, but of something that didn't need a key, something that could exert pressure from a world away. The tapping started on his window, a slow, patient rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. It was closer now, louder. It wasn't just in his head anymore. Alex didn't move. He didn't turn on the light. He just sat and listened to the sound of the immense, unforgiving pressure from the bottom of the world, reaching out for him. He had brought something back with him from the worksite, a lonely, cold presence that had been waiting in the dark for 100 years, and now it just wanted to come inside. The tapping grew more frantic, the glass of the window beginning to groan, and Alex simply closed his eyes, the memory of that fine, cold mist in his cockpit fresh on his skin. Pressure. L-log 2145 times 03. DSV Tethys maintaining programmed depth at 3,284 meters. All systems nominal. Ambient pressure 39.1 MPa. External temperature 2.1 degrees Celsius. Life support cycling at 98% efficiency. Log 214730. Hull integrity scan complete. Micro stress readings within acceptable parameters. All seals holding. Log 2150. Routine passive sonar sweep initiated. Monitoring for non-biologic signatures as per Mission Directive 7 Alpha. The deep-sea research vessel Tethys moved as a presence through a world of absolute black and crushing force. Inside the cramped command deck, sonar technician Elias Vance stared at the primary passive array, his world a hypnotic waterfall of glowing green data cascading down a dark screen. For 6 hours, the only anomaly had been the rhythmic beat of his own heart, a dull metronome against the ever-present low-frequency hum of the carbon dioxide scrubbers. The air tasted sterile and metallic, recycled 1,000 times over, a constant subliminal reminder of the 4 kilometers of freezing water pressing down on the titanium hull. He ran a routine diagnostic on the hydrophone array, the system returning a green-lit optimal that felt like a hollow reassurance. Every creak of the titanium shell, every resonant groan of metal under unimaginable stress, was a voice from the abyss whispering of an inevitable, catastrophic failure. The slightly tacky, non-slip texture of the deck plating under his boots was the only thing that felt completely solid in his world. Log 215820. Anomaly detected. Sector Gamma 7. Bearing 092, range indeterminate. Signature is non-compliant with known profiles. A single discordant pixel appeared. It was a flicker, a mote of digital dust where none should exist, a point of utter silence in a field of ambient noise. It wasn't a whale fall, which would register with a complex organic decay signature. It wasn't a geological feature, which would be static. It wasn't another nation's curious hardware. They had their own recognizable acoustic fingerprints. It was wrong, an informational vacuum. Elias leaned closer, his breath fogging a small patch of the cool glass monitor. The contact held its position, a stubborn anti-star in his artificial sky. He rerouted auxiliary processing power to the array, attempting to resolve the signature. The system returned gibberish. It was as if the hydrophones were reporting the presence of nothing, but with a definite location. He initiated a ping, a single active sonar pulse sent out to paint a target. The request was a significant breach of their silent running protocol, but the knot of cold dread in his stomach overruled procedure. "Commander?" Elias's voice was a croak. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the focused quiet. "Commander Thorne, I advise you observe the sonar station. I have a contact of unknown origin. Commander Thorne." A man whose face seemed carved from granite and etched with the memory of a dozen near-fatal deep-sea emergencies, moved with an economy of motion that belied his age. He arrived behind Elias, the faint scent of machine oil and stale coffee hanging about him like a uniform. He didn't ask what it was. He just looked, his eyes scanning the data streams with an unnerving placidity. "Report, technician. Unidentified contact, sir. Non-biological, non-geological signature. It's not reflecting, it's absorbing." I sent an active ping. It didn't scatter. It absorbed the energy completely. The energy pattern it's now matching our velocity at 4 knots, maintaining a parallel course at approximately 800 meters. It's shadowing us. Thorne's eyes narrowed, masking its profile. That's not a natural phenomenon. It's either sophisticated technology, or it's something else entirely. Protocol was violated at 2204 when you initiated that active ping, Elias. His tone wasn't accusatory, merely a statement of fact for a log that might never be recovered. He keyed a command into a nearby panel. "I'm routing this to the science station. Let's see what their spectral analysis makes of it. In the meantime, execute containment procedure Gamma 9. Seal all bulkheads aft of Section Charlie. I want the command deck isolated. Alert, 220941. Catastrophic power fluctuation detected in main reactor conduit. ECR reports cascading grid failure. Overload propagation detected across primary bus. Switching to auxiliary battery power. The world vanished. The soft green glow of the sonar, the reassuring lights of the control panels, the steady illumination of the command deck, all extinguished in a single, brutal instant. A deep mechanical clunk of massive relays switching over was followed by an oppressive, profound silence. The hum of life support, the whir of ventilation, the electronic chatter of a dozen systems, all gone. For a full 3 seconds, the only sound was the frantic pounding in Elias's ears and the distant, shearing groan of the hull adjusting to a subtle temperature change. Then, the emergency lights flickered on, bathing the compartment in a hellish pulsing crimson. The air, already thin, now carried the sharp metallic smell of ozone, a byproduct of a catastrophic electrical short somewhere deep in the vessel's guts. Static, thick and raw, tore from every speaker on the comms panel, a wall of white noise that felt malevolent, physically present in the room, and through that static, a high-frequency spike sharp and clean, a digital shriek that wasn't human but was unmistakably a vocalization of agony. It was not a sound made by air passing through vocal cords. It was a sound of pure energy, a waveform of distress that registered on the internal comms pickups in Corridor C, near the aft galley, before the channel overloaded and went dead. Log 2221 signed. Auxiliary power stable at 38%. Life support functioning at minimum capacity. Internal communications offline. All hands ordered to report status via emergency beacon. Crewman Alistair, Deck 3, non-responsive. Presumed casualty. Log 222540, Commander. Thorne and Technician Vance proceeding on foot to Deck 3 to investigate loss of contact with Crewman Alistair. They moved through corridors that were no longer familiar. The pulsing red light turned every shadow into a lurking predator, every corner into an ambush point. Thorne held a heavy-duty maglite, its white beam cutting a stark, lonely path through the unnatural twilight. Elias followed close behind, his hand gripping a hydro spanner from the emergency locker so tightly his knuckles were white. The silence between the light's pulses was absolute, a physical weight that pressed in on them. They moved methodically, Thorne checking each intersecting corridor before they proceeded. The Tethys, once a marvel of engineering, felt like a tomb. The galley was chaos. Trays and nutrient packs were scattered across the floor. Some burst open, their contents smeared on the walls. It looked as if a sudden depressurization had tossed the room apart. But the outer hull was intact. The pressure gauges in the corridor were stable. This was internal. This was localized. Crewman Alistair's motionless figure was slumped against a stainless steel counter. There was no visible trauma, no sign of a struggle, no pooling of dark residue. His skin had a pale, waxy luminescence under the beam of Thorne's light, and his eyes were wide, staring at a horror only he had seen. Something was profoundly wrong. The mass of the figure seemed inconsistent, deflated, as if something essential had been scooped out from within, leaving only a hollow shell. Thorne knelt, his face a mask of clinical detachment. He ran a handheld bioscanner over the figure. The device whirred weakly on battery power and displayed a series of error messages before flatlining. "Life signs terminated," he stated, his voice tight. The scanner wasn't just showing 0, it was showing impossible readings. Cellular breakdown was at 98%, but there was no corresponding release of biomatter. No elevated radiation, no chemical agents detected. No measurable heat signature. In fact, localized ambient temperature is 2 degrees below ship standard. He touched his earpiece out of habit, then remembered the comms were down. "We have an unidentified and hostile entity aboard this vessel. All standing orders are superseded by Containment Protocol Delta 7. Objective is to isolate and neutralize the threat." Elias felt a cold that had nothing to do with the failing life support. This wasn't a saboteur or a human stowaway. He had seen the energy signature on the sonar, felt the presence behind the static. The old tales from the early days of deep-sea exploration flooded his mind. Stories passed down in hushed tones of pressures so great they warped reality, of things that slept in the crushing dark and resented being disturbed. This was not a presence of myth. This was a presence of physics, a thing from the abyss that had followed them home and phased through a solid titanium hull. Log 2258-13. Partial success in restoring internal sensor sweeps via secondary terminal. Unidentified entity detected. It exhibits no stable biological signs, no thermal signature, and no measurable mass. It appears as a localized distortion, a mobile refraction of light and energy. Current location, environmental control, deck 4. Tracking it was a nightmare. It didn't appear on thermal imaging, and had no discernible mass for the pressure plate sensors in the floor. They followed it through the tormented guts of the submarine by its side effects. A flickering light panel here. A sudden inexplicable temperature drop in a sealed conduit there. A burst of static from a dead speaker. Elias, back at a secondary monitoring station he'd powered up on the command deck, tracked it as a shimmering, ghosting anomaly in the ship's internal atmospheric sensors. A pocket of impossible cold and dense barometric pressure, moving against the sluggish air currents. It moved without sound, a ripple in the fabric of their reality. It was a thing of shifting shadows and impossible non-Euclidean angles. When they caught a first glimpse of it on a security camera in the long service crawl space behind the primary water recyclers, it wasn't there so much as the space it occupied was wrong. Light bent around it, creating a fluid, amorphous silhouette that seemed to coil and uncoil in dimensions they couldn't perceive. It flowed through the cramped corridors like ink in water, silent and utterly alien, passing through solid pipes and junction boxes as if they were mist. They cornered it in the reactor room. Thorne had sealed the bulkheads ahead of it, funneling it into the one place he knew it might be drawn to an energy source. Here, the air was thick and hot, vibrating with the barely contained power of the ship's atomic heart. The only light was the ethereal blue Cherenkov radiation from the reactor pool, casting a ghostly, wavering glow on the humming machinery. The entity was there. A deeper, more profound darkness coiled around a primary coolant pipe, its form pulsing faintly as if it were drawing sustenance from the intense radiation. Elias. Thorne's voice was a low whisper, barely audible over the throbbing hum of the reactor. Emergency signal kit. Pyrotechnic device now. Elias fumbled with his pack, his fingers numb and clumsy. He pulled out the emergency flare gun, a heavy, antiquated piece of equipment designated PDS-7, designed for surface signaling in open ocean. It felt like a child's toy, a primitive fire starter against the cosmic wrongness of the thing before them. It was the only object they had that could even be considered a tool for this, the only thing that could introduce a massive, uncontrolled energy spike into the immediate environment. He disengaged the safety catch, his thumbs slick with sweat. As he raised the object, the distortion coalesced. For a fraction of a second, as if reacting to the focused intent, it took on a form, a nightmarish composite of deep-sea anatomy, all barbs and bioluminescent lures and chitinous plates, and a great, sightless maw that drank the blue light. He fired. The magnesium flare ignited with a blinding white flash and a deafening whoosh. Flooding the chamber with the light and heat of a miniature sun, the entity convulsed violently. The air itself split with a final, overwhelming vocalization, a wave of pure, multi-frequency sound that shattered the glass faces of nearby gauges and overloaded Elias's senses with a blast of psychic pain, a feeling of immense pressure and ancient cold. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the presence dissolved. It didn't burn or explode. It underwent a rapid decoherence event, collapsing in on itself until nothing was left but a faint tremor in the air and a fine, black particulate matter that settled like soot on the humming deck plates. Log 2314. Hostile entity neutralized. Power grid stabilization at 22%. Awaiting full system reboot and damage control assessment. The silence that followed was more profound than before. The reactor hummed on, oblivious. The emergency light stuttered, then stabilized into a steady, bloody red. It was over. Breathing heavily, Elias leaned against a bulkhead for support, his ears ringing. His gaze drifted to a small auxiliary damage control monitor he hadn't noticed before. Its screen cracked but functional. It displayed a structural integrity schematic of the Tethys. A single blinking red dot pulsed in the center of the display, indicating a system fault, an energy signature, identical to the one he'd just seen dissipate. His dark residue ran cold. He stumbled back to the main command deck, his heart hammering against his ribs like a piston. He bypassed the main sonar array, now a dead screen, and slumped into the engineering station. He ran a level 1 diagnostic on the ship's superstructure itself. The main monitor flickered to life, lines of diagnostic code scrolling past. Then the display resolved. The single blip from the sonar was gone. That was true. In its place, the structural schematic was filled edge to edge with thousands of them. A swarm, but they weren't outside. A quick check of the external hydrophones confirmed it was silent in the abyss. He switched the display back to the internal integrity sensors, magnifying the detail. The ship, their sanctuary, was a constellation of microscopic red lights. They weren't just on the hull. They were blinking from within the life support systems. They were pulsing from inside the ship's insulated wiring in the main water reclamation tanks, in the very crystalline lattice of the titanium bulkheads themselves. They hadn't just attracted one. The ping hadn't been an invitation. It had been a dinner bell. They'd invited them in. The Tethys wasn't a vessel anymore. It was a hive, and it was still falling silently into the endless dark.